graduated in 1924. He was by far the oldest undergraduate in his class.
Good evening, everyone. Wow.
And hello to you, too.
And welcome to the Moscow Board of Adjustments meeting for Tuesday, January 28th, 2016. Our first order of business is going to be the approval of minutes from our last meeting, which was January 6th, 2016. Any comments? Marshall?
No comments, Joe. I just move approval of the January 6, 2016 minutes.
All right.
And I'll second that.
I have a motion. I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Abstentions? Fair enough.
Aye.
Motion passes. All right. The next item is welcoming our new board member. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you.
This is her first meeting, and it's actually nice to have a full board. We're just short one member tonight, but the position's at least filled. We have two items on the agenda tonight, and the office where I work is actually working for the second person, so I will have to recuse myself from that. We don't have a vice chair to take my place because that position was not filled. So we need to do an election of officers this evening. So in order to add that to the agenda, I would like to have a motion and a second so that we can do that.
I'll also move.
I'll second that.
Right? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. So we need a nomination for chair and vice chair.
I would move that we renominate Joe Bozzoli as chair.
In the interest of expediting this, I would accept.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. All right. Well, we have a motion and a second for chair. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. All right. Now a vice chair. And it has to be someone here tonight because they're going to have to fill my shoes for the last half of this meeting.
I think Linda would do a wonderful job as a vice chair.
As long as
have a
there's some
motion?
vice involved, sure.
I'll move to nominate Linda as the vice chair if she would accept.
I will.
Then I'll second.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. So ends the extra excerpt into our agenda this evening. So on to the first public hearing this evening.
Okay. Good evening, board members. For your review tonight is a special use permit and a variance request for a property located in the city of Moscow addressed as 1021 Harold Street. The applicant, the Rotary Veterans Memorial Pavilion Incorporated, who does business as the Palouse Ice Rink, is requesting an extension of their existing special use permit to allow for the continued operation of the ice rink and renewal of the existing variance from the off-street parking lot paving requirements for their temporary ice rink facility. The existing special use permit and variance received for the temporary ice rink facility in July 2011 is set to expire at the end of next month. On that July 2011 special use permit approval, there was a condition of approval that was stated as follows. The applicant shall initiate construction of a permanent ice rink facility within 5 years of approval of this SUP. Upon completion of the permanent ice rink facility, this SUP for the operation of the ice rink facility shall become perpetual and shall not expire. Should the applicant fail to initiate construction within 5 years of this approval or fail to progress with the construction and completion of the permanent facility in a diligent and expedient manner, this SUP shall be immediately terminated and all use of the subject ice rink facility shall cease. The applicant has indicated that significant strides have been made towards planning, fundraising, and acquiring assets for the permanent facility. The applicant also indicates that 3 more years for the temporary facility would allow sufficient time for them to obtain necessary funding to construct a permanent facility. Therefore, the applicant also needs to request renewal of the existing variance from the off-street parking lot paving until the permanent facility is constructed. The variance that was approved in 2011 had a condition that stated that the variance approval shall only be valid for the duration of the operation of the existing temporary ice rink facility as allowed under that 2011 special use permit. So therefore, the variance also expires at the end of next month. The operating characteristics of the Palouse Ice Rink are as follows. October through April, there are activities at the rink that involve ice skating, figure skating, hockey, curling, and broom ball. The hours are limited to 6:15 a.m. to 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, 6:15 a.m. to midnight, Friday, Saturday, and prior to recognized holidays. Hockey is limited to the hours of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily, and the music played over the public address system is limited to 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. These were all conditions of the existing special use permit. The applicant is requesting one modification to the operating hours through this SUP renewal. That request is to allow for hockey tournaments to begin at 7 a.m. on 4 specific weekends each season when youth tournaments are held at the facility. During the off-season from April to October, the facility is rented out for various community and fairgrounds activities. The subject property is highlighted in red here. We have South Blaine Street here on the west side, Harold Street on the north side of the property, South Mountain View Road, and the property is also partially bordered by White Avenue. So the Palouse Ice Rink has some extensive land use action and permitting history, and I'd like to go through that briefly just to give a little bit of the background. First off, the Palouse Ice Rink leases the subject property from Latah County, and the last lease that was signed was in 2012, and that was a 50-year lease, so it is set to expire now in 2062. The temporary ice rink facility has been located on the subject property since the initial special use permit approval in December of 2000. That permit was set to expire in 3 years from the approval date. There was a condition on that permit that the parking lot be paved by October 2001. In October 2001, the special use permit was amended for modification to the operating hours and the playing of music. In May of 2002, there was a development agreement that was established for the parking lot paving to be completed by December 2005, which would have been 5 years from the date of the initial special use permit approval. This is consistent with the zoning code provision that allows for deferral of parking lot paving for up to 5 years. In May of 2003, the ice rink special use permit had expired. The 2000 approval had expired and so was approved with an expiration date of 1 year. In June of 2004, it once again had expired and was reviewed again and approved again with an expiration date of 1 year. In August of 2004, the applicant appealed that special use permit due to some restrictive conditions. And in March of 2005, the June 2004, this was an exception to the approved special use permit that allowed extended hockey hours in the early mornings for the tournament weekend, so very similar to the modification of the operating hours that they are requesting through this permit. In October of 2005, the previous permit had expired, and so the proposal was once again reviewed and approved with a 2-year expiration date this time. And there was a condition that the parking lot improvements be completed by September of 2006. In August of 2007, the permit again had expired, and the ice rink special use permit was approved again, and for the first time they requested a variance for the approval for the waiver of parking lot paving requirements for just the temporary facility. There was a 4-year expiration date set on this permit, which coincided with, at that time, the expiration date for the lease with the county. Therefore, in July 2011, the 4 years had approached, and the current permit expired once again. The ice rink then applied for another renewal of the special use permit and a renewal of the variance. The lease at that time had been extended to the year 2014. The permit was approved in perpetuity if construction of the permanent facility was initiated within 5 years of approval. Otherwise, the permit was set to expire in 5 years and the use shall cease. The variance was approved for as long as the SUP was valid and for the temporary facility only. The subject property is located within the medium-density residential R3 zone. Public service and utility facilities are especially permitted use in the R3 zone, and in that section, fairgrounds are specifically listed. Historically, the Palouse Ice Rink has been permitted with a special use permit in association with the fairgrounds use. Design requirements for parking lots require that parking lots be paved. However, as I mentioned previously, there is a deferral option for paving not to exceed 5 years that is permitted with a parking lot development agreement, and the Palouse Ice Rink has already utilized this option for that 5-year agreement. Therefore, the continuation of a temporarily surfaced parking lot does require the renewal of the expired variance from parking lot surfacing requirements. As I mentioned, the property is within the R3 zone, this dark gray-green color. Properties directly adjacent to the north are all residential in use and also in the R3 zone across Harold Street. Directly to the south and adjacent to the property is also R3 zone, and as well as to the west. Properties to the south consist of the Highway District property, Fire Station 2 and training facility, and directly here to the west on the corner of Harold and Blaine Street is the National Guard Armory. These are similar type public service and utility facilities. On the subject property, the temporary facility is currently located right here. These other buildings are fairgrounds buildings, exhibit halls, and such that are used for fairgrounds activities. Further to the east, across Mountain View Road, is R1 zone, single-family residential, and a distance south across White Avenue is a motor business zone with primarily commercial uses. The subject property is approximately 14.5 acres in size. As I kind of already mentioned, the other uses on the property include the fairgrounds buildings, exhibit halls, parking areas. In the corner of Blaine Street and White Avenue is Lions Club Park and a ball field on that southwest corner. And I've already covered those with the map. Regarding streets and access to the property, there's approximately 1,100 feet of frontage on Harold Street, and that is the side that's most closely adjacent to the ice rink facility. There is limited vehicle access off of Harold Street, and that was limited by the current special use permit that had a condition that only emergency access be allowed to the ice rink facility from Harold Street. There's approximately 427 feet of frontage off of Mountain View for the parcel. There is a service road that accesses Mountain View Road and provides access to fairgrounds and the ice rink facility. And then Blaine Street and White Avenue frontage on the southwest corner, and the main vehicle access to the site is off of White Avenue. So as indication that the applicant provided about the activity and the planning that has been ongoing for several years for the permanent facility, the applicant has submitted very conceptual site plan and some building elevations and floor plans for the proposed permanent facility. So that's what we're looking at here is the proposed site plan. This is showing the new facility here, and it does take into account several of the conditions that were applied to the previous special use permit, which included no parking adjacent to Harold Street, a 20-foot setback from Harold Street, no vehicular access to the parking areas from Harold Street. One thing I'd like to note is that this site plan does not provide for the number of parking spaces that would be required for the permanent facility. However, at this time, we're just looking at the extension of the temporary facility, and at the time that a permanent structure would be constructed, it would be required through the building permit process that they resubmit a final site plan accommodating all of the minimum parking requirements. Here's a concept for the floor plan for the ice rink, showing the main rink here, some seating areas, locker rooms, restrooms, rental area, and then some building elevations for the exterior and the interior as well. Here's a photo of the site today from Harold Street looking at the west side of the current temporary facility. And here's looking at the east side of that facility also from Harold Street. and the east side from Mountain View Road. The criteria and standards for approval of a special use permit are as follows. I believe there are 7. I'm going to read through those. Is the proposed use a specifically permitted use within the zoning district? Is the proposed use in harmony with the neighborhood and surrounding land uses? Will the proposed use as approved or as approved with conditions generate nuisances that would be injurious or detrimental to the adjoining properties or the neighborhood, including but not limited to noise, dust, glare, vibrations, odors, and the like? Will the location, design, and size of the proposed use be adequately served by existing streets, public facilities, and services? Will the proposed use endanger the public health or safety if located where proposed? And does the proposed use meet all applicable development standards of the zoning code? And I'm sorry, will the proposed use be in conflict with the comprehensive plan? So based on those relevant criteria and standards for approval of a special use permit, staff is recommending approval of the application for renewal of the Palouse Ice Rink special use permit to allow the continued operation of the ice rink facility and operations as proposed at 1021 Harold Street with the following conditions, and several of these are carried over from the current special use permit. Number 1 is that the special use permit shall allow for the continued operation of the existing temporary facility so long as the applicant maintains a valid lease from the Latah County to operate said ice rink facility subject to the limitations of condition number 2. Number 2, the applicant shall initiate construction of a permanent ice rink facility within 3 years of approval of this special use permit. Upon completion of the permanent ice rink facility, this special use permit for the operation of the ice rink facility shall become perpetual and shall not expire. Should the applicant fail to progress with the construction and completion of the permanent facility in a diligent and expedient manner, this SUP shall be immediately terminated and all use of the subject ice rink facility shall cease. Number 3 is that the hours of operations shall remain as they are today at 6:15 a.m. to 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, 6:15 a.m. to 12 p.m. Friday and Saturday, and prior to recognized holidays. This condition shall apply to the temporary facility only. Number 4 is that the hours for practicing or playing hockey with pucks and/or sticks and broom balls shall be limited to the hours of 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily, with the exception of the 4 weekends each season that the facility hosts youth hockey tournaments beginning at 7 a.m. This condition shall apply to the temporary facility only. Number 5 is that the hours for broadcast music over the facility's PA system shall be limited from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. This condition shall apply to the temporary facility only. And at the time of construction of the permanent facility, the applicant shall install a Type C buffer, including a 4-foot solid fence along the northern boundary of the property adjacent to Harold Street to extend the full length of the parking area and facility development. Number 7 is there shall be no direct access from the proposed permanent parking areas to Harold Street except for limited emergency vehicle access if deemed necessary. And number 8 is that upon construction of the permanent facility, no off-street parking shall be located between the permanent facility and Harold Street. And finally, the proposed permanent facility shall meet all other applicable city code requirements, including but not limited to the parking lot development standards. I guess I'd like to ask at this time if you'd like to stop and discuss the special use permit, or shall I proceed with the recommendation for the variance?
Actually, I just have one question about that. What's the status, if you know it from the applicant, of the real status of proceeding to a permanent facility? And is this the only site they're looking at for a permanent facility?
I will definitely let the applicant address that, but I do believe that this is the only site they are looking at.
Okay.
So one of the criteria for the SUP is that it be in compliance with all of the requirements of the zoning ordinance, right? That's the second to the last one?
Yes.
And so we can't approve it unless we approve the variance
that's
first.
That's right. Okay, so I'll proceed then with the recommendation for the variance. Okay, thank you. There's 3 criteria for approval of a variance. Number 1 is, are there special conditions or circumstances that exist which are peculiar to the property, such as size, shape, topography, or location, which are not applicable to other properties similarly situated in the same zoning district? Number 2 is, because of the aforementioned special conditions of the property, would application of the provisions of the zoning code impose undue hardship and deprive the property owner of rights commonly enjoyed by owners of other property similarly situated in the same zoning district? And third is, will the granting of the variance be in conflict with the public interest or injurious to the property or persons in the vicinity of the subject property? Based on those relevant criteria and standards for approval of a variance, staff recommends approval of the request to renew the variance from the off-street parking lot paving requirements for the temporary Palouse ice rink facility located at 1021 Harold Street, subject to the approval of the accompanying special use permit with the following conditions. The variance approval shall be extinguished concurrently with the Palouse ice rink SUP approval 3 years from the date of approval. The variance shall not be applicable when the applicant constructs a permanent enclosed facility, at which time paving and all other standards for a parking lot shall be imposed according to the zoning code. And for the duration of this variance approval, the temporary gravel parking lot must be maintained with a minimum of 4 inches of 3/4 inch minus crushed basalt rock gravel, and shall be maintained reasonably dust-free and free of ruts and holes as required by the zoning code. So with that, I'm available for questions.
Yeah, Becky, if the applicant fails to procure a building permit within 3 years, do they still have the option of coming back before this board again?
They would, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think a number of questions, which unfortunately would probably be better for Rod or Bill, but I'll ask anyway. The first one, though, I think you can answer. With the exception of the most recent SUP approval, the applicant has been in violation of every one of their use permits. Is that accurate?
You could phrase it that way, yes.
Since every one of them required them to pave the lot, and they failed to do so, so they were in violation of all their permits.
Well, except for the time period when they,
At 5 years.
the deferral, and then there were some other times where it was extended for a year or so for the paving.
Okay. The second one, the statute that allows variances does not appear to, a bit of creative interpretation, but does not appear generally to deal with these sorts of circumstances. So it says that variances can deal with requirements related to lot size, lot coverage, width, depth, front yard, side yard, rear yard, setbacks, parking space, which is the one you could maybe get at, height of buildings, or other ordinance provision affecting the size or shape of a structure or the placement of the structure upon the lots or the size of lots. And as I understand it, the staff or the city has determined that if a request does not fit within that provision, that it is not, a variance is not allowed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So is it the city's position that paving of a lot fits within the provision affecting the size or shape or structure or placement of the structure upon the lot? Is that the city's interpretation?
It is, yes. I met with the city attorney, and it was determined that based on the history and the historical approval for a variance for this, that it was appropriate to proceed with renewal of the variance for the parking lot paving. That was his
That's
determination.
not an answer to the question I asked. Right. Having made a mistake before does not make it legal.
It was the
later.
city attorney's determination to proceed with a variance from the parking lot paving for this property.
Okay. And I'll note that we are not subject to we don't have to follow the city attorney's interpretation.
You can make your own determination, yes.
And then the other final couple of questions I have to do with the application. I don't see in the application or in your presentation any allegation that there is a peculiar condition of the lot itself, or that they are suffering any form or type of undue hardship because of that peculiar condition. I mean, the applicant is able to do anything anybody else can do.
So those criteria, the staff provides a recommended response to those criteria. It's up to the board to make those determinations. The staff does provide a recommendation that, I'm sorry.
Right, I'm aware of that, but it's not the staff's job to be the applicant's advocate. I just didn't see that the applicant provided any information with respect to that.
The applicant completed an application and provided a response to each of those criteria.
Okay,
So you can certainly ask those questions of the applicant.
So, but to be clear, is it staff's interpretation of this situation that there is in fact a peculiar condition of this property? There's a unique condition of this property, not of the owner or of the contracts or the history, but of the property itself, that prevents them from doing something that somebody else can do, that creates in effect a legal undue hardship?
Yes. As indicated by the response to the relevant criteria and standards by staff, the recommendation that's provided. The unique arrangement for use of the subject property for the Palouse ice rink, the temporary nature of the facility use, and the Rotary Veterans Memorial Pavilion Incorporated intentions of constructing a permanent ice rink facility within 3 years are special conditions of the property and the use of the property. That
Is there any way to answer
staff's
the question
opinion.
I asked without reference to the use? As you know, use variances are not allowed. and
Yes,
we're not-
yes, I understand that.
If there's any way to answer the question without reference to the owner or of the particular, we're not supposed to consider any of that, right? What can they not do that other people in the zoning district can because of the conditions of the parcel itself? Without that, we can't grant a variance. And I don't see that there's anything that they are prohibited from doing. It seems that the problem is just that they don't want to comply with the zoning ordinance.
I'm going to leave the determination up to the board.
Thank you. I apologize for that.
That's
You know,
okay.
I actually have a question that's even more fundamental and goes along the lines of what Jerry is saying. There has been a lot of, I think, misdirection over the years as to the applicant and the property owner. I would like someone to clarify who's actually responsible for paving that, the owner or the applicant? Because that then determines, in part, the question Jerry's asking. Because if the owner won't let the applicant pave their property, then the applicant...
Well, I would respond to that that's an agreement between the owner and the applicant, and their agreement with the lease. That's up to them who actually funds the paving of that requirement. If the
Right,
board-
but the owner has continued to sign leases for this applicant for 16 years now, under the assumption that it was temporary, and now that lease has been extended for 60 years?
Yeah, 50 years.
So who's responsible for complying with the zoning ordinance, the applicant or the property owner?
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt for just 1 second?
Sure.
I think the questions that you and Mr. Long are suggesting are really properly questions for the city attorney, and I don't see the city attorney present tonight. And I wonder if it would be appropriate to table this matter until the city attorney can join us for this meeting so that the staff, whose responsibility and expertise is in land use planning, would not be put on the buzzer of having to answer legal questions.
Chairman, I agree 100% that the city attorney should be here, but I would note that the responsibility for interpreting this particular ordinance lies with this board exclusively. We do not have to listen to the city attorney. He gives us advice, but we make the decisions. So,
Mr. Chairman, it's odd that an attorney, perhaps a professor who used to be an attorney and who is now a professor, would say that an attorney, the advice of an attorney is not an important aspect of a board's functioning. I can tell you, as a member of the city council of this city for 18 years, that during those 18 years, even though I am an attorney, I wanted the advice and counsel of our attorney, and most of the time I took it, not always, but most of the time. So I think it's valuable for that individual to be here advising us, so that then with that advice we can choose in an informed way to either accept it or move on in a different direction. So I think that I would move that we table this matter.
Or I ask for a second on that. I'm in agreement for another reason. There are things about this recommendations that refer to the current site and not the forthcoming building. So I'm unclear if we're approving something now or something given conditions that may apply in the future. There are also things about the public works planning aspect of this that I think a public works person should be here to answer questions as well. That said, do we have a second or further discussion before we... Marshall?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of tabling it. I think we have enough past information and current information to make a decision, and I think it's irrelevant whether it's the responsibility of the applicant or the owner of who's paving it. I think the city can figure that out at the appropriate time. And I don't think it's going to be paved within 3 years. I think it will only be paved once a permanent site has been sited. So I think it's irrelevant, and I would hate to table it this evening without moving forward. I think we have enough information.
It's a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I just whispered something to you, and for the good of everybody, motions that haven't been seconded are not subject to discussion until they've been seconded. And if nobody seconds it, it just dies for want of a second.
Fair enough. Do I have a second? Not hearing a second, I guess we'll continue on.
So may I make one point?
Sure.
The questions I have are not, I apologize for raising them to Becky, but they're primarily questions that we decide, right, about whether this application satisfies the relevant criterion standards. I don't think require any input from the city attorney, although I do, as I said, I do think he should be here, and I wish he were here. But I think we can proceed without his advice. It is a relatively straightforward application. It just has significant issues that create problems.
If I may address one thing that Chairman brought up regarding whether we're approving the temporary facility or the permanent facility, they're both the same property. We're looking at the same property. The idea here is to renew the existing special use permit, and which at that time they had approved it with the idea that if a permanent facility was constructed within 5 years, it would be approved in perpetuity, and they would not be returning for another renewal. And so the permanent facility was approved. So the idea is to renew that permit under the idea that you would allow for the temporary facility to function with the condition of which is being recommended for 3 years. And then if a permanent facility is constructed in that time, the permanent facility is then approved to proceed with building permits. And the use doesn't have to be reviewed once again.
So are we then to assume that the few drawings that we have so far would imply enough information that a temporary facility is capable of being started in 3 years?
That a permanent facility is capable of being started in 3 years?
Yeah, viably.
Yes.
Okay. More questions for City? Actually, Rebecca, I have a couple questions for you. I was holding off. I was hoping everybody else would have more questions. I have several. Why is there a Type C buffer requested under your 6th recommendation from the city rather than a Type B? And why is parking not required or being suggested to not occur along Herald?
Those were conditions of the current special use permit that staff felt were appropriate to carry forward into this approval. That was what the board had determined in 2011 when they approved the special use permit.
Can you remind us then the difference between a Type C and a Type B buffer? Do you know off the top of your head?
C is the most restrictive,
right.
I believe.
B is just 3 feet of landscape?
No, they're all 10 feet. They're 12 feet. They're all 12 feet wide or 10 feet if irrigated. They just have different numbers of plants. Okay. Is the only difference. So C is actually the most restrictive, meaning the most number of plants.
Does the city know what the required parking would be for that assembly space, full size?
The permanent
You
facility?
mentioned during the proposal that there weren't enough spaces there now.
Yes, I did do that calculation, and it was over 200 spaces. But staff felt that this conceptual site plan was appropriate to present to the board based on the subject property being large enough to be able to accommodate that minimum number of required spaces. Also, with this being conceptual and it being potentially 3 years out, the site plan could change. Right now, we're looking at just renewing the use in the temporary facility with approval for the permanent facility. But like I said, they'd be required to bring forth a final site plan that accommodated all of those minimum parking requirements, and that would be required at the time of the building permit.
Okay. So in theory, right now, there are 70 shown and 200 required,
Yes, approximately, yes.
give or take. Okay. I don't have any more questions. Anybody else have questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
With that introduction, I open it up to the applicant for discussions or explanations of what the goals are.
Can you just say my name?
Yeah, please
or-
state your name and your address for the record, please.
Okay. My name is Tony Mangini. I live at 606 Conestoga here in Moscow.
Can you give us a little background on maybe the relationship between owner and leasee for us?
I will do my best. I'm the vice president for the Palouse Ice Rink. I've been a board member for almost 2 years now. I've been a user of the facility since about 2002, so I know a lot of the history. I will do my best to answer your question. I'd also like to thank Rebecca for her help with the application and doing the presentation this evening, and the board taking the time to hear our request. As far as the history between the owner and our organization, we have been working with Latah County, the fairgrounds, since inception. We actually had a meeting with them the last couple weeks to do a presentation on our permanent facility and proposal that we've been putting together. They have expressed an interest to support our project and what we're trying to do, and a willingness to make accommodations. The point with the parking, I became aware of it through this application process. That was not a number we'd ever been presented before. So certainly not, we're not trying to evade that point. Honestly, that was the first we'd heard of it. We're working with an architecture firm out of Coeur d'Alene. They are the ones that actually built the design and the facility up in Coeur d'Alene. So they have some experience with ice rink facilities, and this was one of the renderings that they had presented us through that process. Can I answer
Jumping in
the
asking
question?
you questions, I should actually give you a chance to present whatever you wanted to first before I start grilling you with questions.
We understand that. I mean, I saw that list, and you know, it's been a long time. You know, some things to know about our organization: we're a 501c3. So when the question is what's preventing this organization from doing some of the things that others should, try running a non-for-profit. It's a challenge. You know, our emphasis, our number one priority is offering a facility for youth sports and youth activities. One of the things that weren't listed on the programs that we offer is a program called Science on Ice. If anybody's had a chance to observe that, it's a program we've had for several years. One of our board members is also an engineer at University of Idaho, and him and several others have put together this program. They invite fifth grade schools in the area. I think 20-some schools have participated. They come in for several hours. They do experiments, and then eventually they get a chance to do some actual ice skating. And so, you know, this facility, the way we operate it, the number one priority is the kids, the youths. We have programs for the kid. We set aside ice time for the youth programs Monday through Thursday. They get the prime ice time, which has always been a frustration for adults because we have to play until 10 o'clock at night. But we also understand why the rink exists, and it is to service the kids. If anybody has been to the facility on a weekend, the number of kids who have birthday parties there or just have an opportunity to go out with their friends and do something constructive, fun, particularly during the winter months, that's what we do. That's what we provide. I did a presentation here with the city, or actually just during open comments, I was talking to him in February, and I got an interesting piece of information from the rink manager at the time. And he told me in the 3-week period during the Christmas holidays, our public skating had over 1,600 attendees that were regulars, the people that don't have season passes. They're just people that were looking for something to do during their holiday break with their family, with their friends, just looking for something to do. And these are people, not just Moscow residents. These are people outside the area that came to Moscow because they were looking for something fun to do. And so the facility does a lot of great things. I got involved myself, not because I play hockey, because honestly, the smaller facility, I'm indifferent on that point. It's really the impact it has on our community and particularly the kids. This facility does some pretty amazing things. And it has the ability, we have the ability to generate enough cash to operate it. We just don't have enough, as a 501c3, it's just difficult to raise enough capital to make major improvements, to build a multi-million-dollar facility. And that's where we are working with, we have a fundraiser, a professional fundraiser named Bob Stout, who is helping us with our fundraising efforts. We've been reaching out to a lot of different groups. We have plans to also do some grant writing. So it's a slow process, and certainly we apologize. We haven't been able to get this done sooner. I think really the big thing first was establishing a viable product, and I think we've done that over our time. Our annual revenue is over $200,000 a year, but we still charge people $5 for skates and rental. We make it an affordable opportunity to do an activity in the wintertime. So, we're not in our business model is not for profit. So we have to be mindful of how we set our prices and make sure that we make our facility accessible to everybody in the community and not just people that happen to have the resources to do it. We've had a program as long as I've been there that any child that wants to participate, there is a scholarship program for them to allow them the opportunity to participate in hockey, which is it is an expensive sport, no question about it. But we have mechanisms in place to where that won't keep somebody from having that opportunity to partake in the facility. But Ms. Paul asked a question. I'd like to answer it because I think it does show. It's easy for me to say, yeah, we've made progress, but ultimately the question is, but what? What have you done? I mean, we've got some drawings we presented here. The financial side of it, we've raised a total of $200,000 of cash. That's a function of some gala events that we've held. We've held 3 over the years. We've held them at the University Inn. On average, our attendance is usually between 350 and 400 people. We've had a very diverse mix of members from our community and even people from the surrounding area who are loyal supporters of the facility. We've had a number of private donations. We formed a group called the 300 Club, which was asking users to even just make a $3,000 commitment to help us raise some money to begin the construction process. We have about $200,000 of verbal commitments in addition to the $200,000 actually raised. We were able to acquire the dasher boards, and if you don't know what that is, it's the boards that run the perimeter of an ice rink. The Spokane Arena was in the process of replacing their boards in 2015, and we were fortunate enough to work with them. They were very generous in the terms that they gave us. We were able to secure them last year, I believe in September, and as of right now, those boards are sitting in a warehouse over in Troy, waiting for a new rink to be built. We took a calculated risk acquiring that large of an asset because we acquired the boards, the glass that goes with it. There is a cost for us to hold that, but we felt like the opportunity it was such a unique opportunity. And I know for myself, as a person who plays hockey, the opportunity to play on the same boards that a minor league hockey team was using certainly has a certain appeal. It has a story behind it. And it also shows that we are committed to getting this done, and it's not really about things have to be brand new or expensive, that we're willing to be creative, and if we can find effective ways to accomplish what we need to with less cost, then that's what we're willing to do. And so I think those combination of things, the other thing we did do is the gala we did in 2015, we did a paddle raise to acquire a scoreboard. That scoreboard was installed, I believe, in December of 15, and it's in the facility now. And it's a scoreboard that will not only work in the existing facility, which our previous scoreboard was not very good, this one can transfer to the new facility. And so we're definitely thinking ahead in the decisions that we're making and trying to make things happen. I think I think one of the challenges the board has had historically is we have a lot of people with really great intentions, but not a lot of business background. I'm also the CFO for NRS here in Moscow, and I've been involved with a lot of major projects. And so I think I've been able to kind of help with that process of getting people to understand how you move things forward and achieve your goals. Talk is cheap. And so at some point you've got to identify what it is you're trying to do and come up with a plan that's going to allow it to happen. And I feel like we're finally reached that point as an organization that we with the plans that we have, with the renderings, with the support we have in the community, having a professional fundraiser working for us, I think there's enough pieces in place that we can finally move forward. And it just took time. And like I said, where I started, I apologize. At some levels it's embarrassing that we've had to ask for as many SUPs and all this stuff, and certainly puts your group in a tough position. But I really do believe this is a valuable resource for our community, and I wouldn't invest so much of my personal time in trying to see it come to a positive resolution if I didn't believe it was worth having.
Jerry, you got a question for me?
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but I'll explain why I'm asking it first. Everything you just said sounds pretty similar to what we heard 5 years ago, that progress is being made on funding, that there were goals and plans, and there was a fair amount of, I think, fatigue on the board and in the city. And in fact, at the time, one of the justifications for not being able to get money was because of lease uncertainty, which has since gone away, and that was one of the significant concerns at that point. And that was all why, and we were promised that you wouldn't be back here, which is why it has this provision that if you fail to progress with construction and completion of a permanent facility, the SUP would expire. And the idea there is, and again, this is just as I recall, so I'm only one person that was there, but what we didn't want is for the SUP to expire after you'd already paid for an architect or after you'd already broken ground but had not gotten it completed. That's what we were concerned about, as I recall with that. And so what I'm asking is, in the last 5 years, since you got this permit, as I said, that's $200,000 number you gave us sounds pretty similar to what we heard before. What progress have you made toward building a new building? How much more money have you raised? What has been done toward building the building? Not improving the existing service, but toward building a building. Because that, unfortunately, is what this condition was about.
Right.
And I recognize that might be hard to answer.
I would be curious. Look, I wasn't here 5 years ago in front of you guys. I couldn't begin to tell you what was told at that time. I really doubt that there was 200,000. I would be curious. I'd like to see the record if that's what was presented.
I don't know if it's true or not.
That's true.
I don't know if it is.
Like I said, I'm a CFO. I'm very familiar with financials. This organization didn't have $200,000 in the books at that time. I guarantee that number is. I don't know what you're recalling, but I don't think that was us.
I think I'm remembering more of the promises than the number, right?
Okay, and like I'm saying, I can't tell you what you were promised because I wasn't here. So all I can tell you today is where we are and what we're trying to accomplish. We do have a temporary structure that's deteriorating. We recognize, even if we're giving this SUP, that facility that we have now isn't going to last much longer. And so we're up against the wall either way. So I don't know what to tell you about your question. I don't have an answer for you.
That's fair.
I wouldn't. I tend to be people that know me know I'm a person of integrity. I wouldn't stand before you today if I didn't believe we had an honest chance to make this happen. That's what I'll leave it at.
I have two easy questions.
Wonderful.
What is the season? How long does this operate? From when to when?
Okay. So the current arrangement, and again, remember who our landlord is the fairgrounds, is October through April. In reality, we usually shut down about the end of March. We stayed open until April 18th of 2015. It was, from a financial standpoint, a very poor decision to stay open that late, just because the facility isn't insulated, and it gets very expensive to keep ice. And so our utility costs far exceeded any revenue we could generate. And so this year we pretty much shut down either by March 31st or April 2nd. It was somewhere within that range. We shortened it intentionally because of the cost. What would it look like in the future? again, we still have to recognize our arrangement with the fairgrounds, and they require that we not be in operation for the fair, which I believe is usually the third week of September. And then once that's completed, then pretty much we can operate at will. I would anticipate with the new facility, we'd probably be up and running by October 1st, and probably run until April 30th or May 31st. It'd be a matter of determining, what makes sense financially. There's a lot of people that enjoy using the facility, but anybody that lives on the Palouse knows once the weather turns nice, it's kind of nice to be outside. And so I don't know how realistic it'd be to say we're going to be open through the summer as an ice rink facility. I'm doubtful that would ever make sense for our type of facility as a not-for-profit. But certainly, we would find a purpose. I think sometimes we get labeled as strictly a hockey facility, which is unfortunate. We're a community-minded facility. We host the Arboretum's annual plant sale every year. We have the roller derby gals like to use our facility for practices. Last fall, the Moscow High School football team actually used our facility when the smoke was really bad. If anybody remembers last August, September, we actually allowed them to use our facility for some practices because they couldn't practice outdoors. Apparently there was a bar mitzvah there this summer. So, we really do embody what we say. We're a community-oriented facility, and so we say we're not for profit. We do need to generate enough revenue to justify keeping the doors open, and so there's a fine line that we walk. But I would anticipate something like in October to late April, early May would be our future operation schedule. Really, the biggest thing we're excited about by getting a new facility would be expanding our hours, because that has created a financial challenge for us. There's a lot of, most ice rink facilities would be offering hockey at least till midnight, if not later. We don't have that option, so we do lose time. We get a lot of requests from sororities in particular from campus to use the facility. I'm sure they'd be happy taking a 10 to midnight slot, but it gets to be difficult to offer and still get everything else that we have in our programming on the ice. We have both of the upper level teams. They call themselves Bantams and Midget. If you try to compare it to high school, it'd be like the JV and the varsity teams. They can't play their games here because it's just too small of ice. So both those teams play their games up in Cheney. They will practice here some, but then they do practice up at the Cheney facility just because they need practice on a bigger sheet of ice.
That was actually my second question, and this goes back 16 years to the first one that I was actually at, and the whole purpose for wanting a new facility was, and I think the term was that the existing rink is a 3/4 sheet. Is that right? So that drawing implies that the building's basically the same size, just further north. But if I understand the desire for a full-size rink, the building needs to be bigger. Is that correct?
Absolutely. If you look at it, this footprint only covers half of the existing slab, and then it extends quite a bit further to the north. So it actually it'll be a bigger footprint than what you see today.
So the current ice rink sheet is not wide enough or long enough for teams to play regulation games on?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and it's not just hockey. Figure skating has always suffered in Moscow because they also require a larger sheet of ice. In order for a performer to do their routine, they need a certain amount of space. Moscow has struggled to keep coaches because they go by different levels. Like a lot of different activity sports, they have different categories, different skill levels, and they can't go beyond the beginner level with our facility. And so they just get frustrated, and either they relocate or they stop doing it. And so, yeah, it's more than just hockey, but certainly hockey is a big part of it.
Mr. Chairman, the question I had earlier was really just to bring me up to date, because my involvement with the ice rink was way, way back at the very, very beginning. And at that time, we were looking for another location beyond the White Avenue Herald area, because we thought at that time, and I was helping the folks who were trying to find the money and the site, we thought that more motor business kind of site, either along the Pullman Road or something maybe even along the Troy Road, but something on a real, honest-to-God, 100% arterial with some signage and out of a neighborhood and so on would be a real plus. Well, we couldn't find any place that was even within shouting distance of the money that was available then, and I'm sure that hasn't really changed much, if any. But has there been any concern for finding that full sheet of ice someplace else within the community in terms of locations?
With any major project, there's always that temptation to ask the question, what if?
Yeah.
And we've been battling that for some time. I mean, the what if that we really wrestled with is, well, what if we built the new facility adjacent to the existing sheath? And that way we can save the original one and have a second one. Well, that sounds great, but if you look at the diagram, you've got the sewer line that runs diagonally through the property,
Yes,
which prohibits us from building on the east side of the property, which that would be the ideal scenario for us. If in a perfect world, that would be the solution we'd love to do, because then we could run one chiller to service both ice surfaces. We could have two facilities. We could use the original facility for public skates and for youth hockey, and we could have the new facility for regular hockey and whatever else we desire to do with it. But you've got the sewer line, and then you got this is fairground property. We don't get just to decide we want to use it this way. We're a tenant. We're not the owner, and so that's a challenge. We've had conversations with people that would like us to develop somewhere between Moscow Pullman, somewhere on the border. Look, again, we're a 501c3. If
Sure.
money was no object,
Yeah.
certainly we would be more open to those ideas. We're struggling. It's been a challenge. I mean, like we get criticized because we're not raising money fast enough, and we want to make a decision that's going to put us even further in the hole. That's what we've been dealing with. We invite people to ask questions because we want ultimately when this thing happens, and I believe it will, we want people to feel good about it. So if there's something we could do better, we're open to it. But we've been banging our heads for a long time trying to figure out what is the best option, and we truly believe this is our best option.
Some really nice hockey fan who has a terminal disease needs to get friendly with us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Wayne Gretzky does live outside of Coeur d'Alene. Maybe we can
there
get
you
him to
go.
come down here.
Did I understand that your organization was a victim of theft recently? Or maybe in the not too distant?
In 2015, we discovered that the former bookkeeper had been systematically embezzling funds from our organization. The news, it's well documented in the newspapers. The total, I just saw this the other day, I think it was $28,686. I believe is what the final.
How has this affected what you're trying to accomplish?
It hasn't helped. The manager at the time made the decision to put that individual as a signer on our account, didn't know how to reconcile her work, and allowed this thing to happen for a long period of time. As a board, we bear just as much responsibility because we're supposed to be on top of it as well, and we have done everything we can to correct the problem and also establish trust with our user groups and make sure people understand what took place and what have we done to make sure that doesn't happen again in the future. I mean, any organization, that is a risk. So it's just a matter of having the controls in place and making sure that you follow your protocols, and you just can't allow those kinds of things to happen.
Any more questions for Mr. Mangini? We've made him stand there for quite a while now. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Before we close the public hearing on this issue, is there anyone else that would like to get up and talk in favor of this application? Seeing none, are there any folks out there that would like to stand up and speak in opposition to this?
My name is Wendy Beck. I live at 1205 Cow Street. The back of my house is on Herald, so I am one of the neighbors. I am not specifically opposed to the ice rink, but I do want to point out that the comment that the neighborhood is not adversely affected is not entirely true. I've been speaking about this for many years now. To be honest, although the noise has continued to be a problem at times, it's much less of a problem than it was in the past. I appreciate the efforts that have been made to lessen noise, but I'm still concerned because environmental conditions affect how noise travels. So the fact that it wasn't too bad this last year doesn't mean that it won't be bad next year. Weather makes a big difference. The amount of snow makes a big difference. So it seems to be good, at least from my house. But everybody has different rebounds of sound. There are still issues. In terms of ice, hockey noise for me is not as problematic as it was. However, I still hear crowd noises like stomping and cheering that can be quite annoying on certain weekends in particular. Ice season may be from October to April, but the facility is used year-round. We weren't allowed to speak to this in the past. It was limited to ice only. The reality is that it's used throughout the year, and renters have that same 6:15 to 11 or 12 time frame, which means that it can be very distracting to the neighbors. The problem that I experience is primarily from the PA system, which is cranked up full blast. People go in there and crank it up and play, in particular, radio. They turn on the radio, play 70s and 80s hits and country music, which not my music. And it's annoying. I would like to be able to enjoy my property, but having that noise at times for hours in a day, sometimes when there's just one or two people in the facility because they just wanted to hear it while they were doing whatever work or whatever they happened to be doing, that's a concern. I find it quite amusing that Section 16 of the lease agreement talks about the lessee being entitled to quiet enjoyment of the premises. I know that's a legal term, but it's still an irony involved in that our neighborhood has been affected in terms of our ability to have quiet enjoyment of our homes and yards for so long. Personally, I don't care about the parking lot being paved right now, except that I find that the endless extensions to be quite telling. So many times we've been told this is the last extension, no more. This is time and time again. Last extension for the parking lot variance, last extension for the special use permit, but nothing happens. Please don't interpret the lack of complaints to police as saying that there are no concerns. We lost some neighbors who were on the open end when it was open, and it was a major loss to the neighborhood. Please don't keep giving them unlimited extensions. I realize that the decision about this 3-year extension, I've given up kind of, but don't keep doing it again and again. At some point, you have to say it stops. Thank you for listening.
Question?
You mentioned that you lost a neighbor was that a person passed away or a
No,
person
they
just
left.
got sick and moved?
No, it didn't kill them.
Okay. But they moved because of the... Okay.
They moved. They couldn't take it anymore.
That was it. Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else care to step up to the podium and speak against this application? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing.
Joe, you
and
want rebuttals from applicants?
for one person. Would you like to come back up and respond to Mrs. Beck's comments? Actually, I might be able to coach you along here a little bit.
Okay.
You were talking about the facility, the nature of the facility is kind of declining over time. And I know at one point it had an open end. My assumption, and maybe you can clarify this, is that a new facility is going to have better sound assemblies in its construction.
Certainly, and we want to be good neighbors. I mean, that's certainly one of the core things, and we've tried to adhere to the agreement as best we can. We religiously get off that ice before 10 p.m. every evening when we play hockey. I apologize if the employees, I don't know if maybe they were even aware that the music was a nuisance for neighbors. And when we've been asked to accommodate something, we've done the best we could. We did close the east end of the facility several years ago in an effort to reduce the noise. We added the berm to the north side of the property to help reduce noise. And again, the plan is to have the enclosed facility so we can increase our hours, and we're never going to be allowed to do that if we can't address the noise issue. And so it's certainly on our minds, and so we want to be good neighbors. I mean, it doesn't serve us any purpose to try and exist and not get along with our neighbors as best we can. So certainly we're aware of that.
Okay. If I remember way back, the broom ball was the thing that was creating the loud noise, and it became one of the conditions to limit the sound to those certain time frames at some point. And realizing that you try to utilize the facility year round, if we were to extend the sound, the loud things from early morning and late at night, would that be an issue for you?
What do you mean, reduce the?
Well, there's a time frame in here for certain PA and loud occurrences, before, I forget the time frame, before 9 or
PA is
after
9
10 or
a.m.,
something,
9
something like that.
p.m.
If that was basically to read not just during the hockey season but year round, that wouldn't prohibit you from still using the facility year round, would it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No. It would help us. This person here, if she just let us know. I mean, honestly, if the music's loud, we'll turn it down. I mean, we're not trying to disrupt anybody's day. I think, look, the reality is a lot of our employees are either college students or high school kids. They probably got their music. I mean, they probably listen to the music just as loud in their room or in their car, and I don't think they may even be aware that it could be a nuisance for somebody else. But certainly it isn't done with any malice or intent. It's probably just some kid didn't even think about it. So if it's a problem and we're aware of it, we'll address it. Is that it? Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, now I'll close it, public hearing, and let the board discuss this.
Joe, I have an additional question, if it's okay. And I apologize in advance. I don't know if there's an easy way to put this, and I absolutely don't think there's a problem, but I want it stated for the record. Last time we heard this, found out after the fact that the city staff person, it wasn't Rebecca, that presented, was in fact active in roller derby. And so I was a little concerned about the potential for conflicts of interest. And so, Ms. Paul, I just want you to tell us, because I'm sure there's not a problem, but you said earlier that you were involved with some earlier version of this, and I just want,
15 years ago.
And you don't think that creates any...
I do not.
Okay, that's all. That's all I want to know.
I want to just make a comment just for the public record, too, because I kind of think it's the issue that Mrs. Paul was dancing around, but quite frankly, I think the city and the board has been dancing around the issues and trying to find ways to let this slide because they know it's positive to the community. They know it's positive for the kids. Everyone understands that. And the big concern is, well, if we don't let it work here and give them the time to let it work here, they might move somewhere, like out into the corridor. So for the record, I want everyone to understand that that is why we've been trying to find reasons to continue to justify it, because that it just is what it is. That You can deny it if you want, but that's what we're trying to do. We know it is to the benefit of the community. The question becomes, fundraising is super hard. And it's contingent upon population, it's contingent upon the economy, it's contingent upon a lot of things. And so we hear this, it comes back, it comes back, it comes back. My frustration tonight is the applicant is trying to do it. They want to do it. The owner has been benefiting by having a leasee for 16 years, no sweat off their back. They've got that same leasee now for another 60 years. Chances are they're not going to move out in the corridor because that would cost even more than what they're trying to do here and can't. So, cards where they fall. I think that the owner should provide the buffer, the level C buffer, so that on that north side, it's going to eliminate that much more noise and give the applicant, not the owner, the applicant, the time to do what the community feels is clearly in the best interest of the community. Open it up for more comment.
Sure, Joe, if I may, Mr. Chairman. First, to follow up on something I said earlier, according to the minutes from the July 26, 2011 hearing, the applicant indicated that they would like to break ground in 2012, and that the primary problem was the lack of a long-term lease, and getting the long-term lease would facilitate fundraising, and then thus hoped within a year to have broken ground, which I think was the source for that condition, because we accepted that they were in fact.
And if I remember right, that was, and I might be wrong, but I remember that as being the Latah County Fairgrounds was actually considering moving, so they couldn't sign a lease with the applicant.
Well,
but that's way back.
Yeah, there were some issues above our pay grade with respect to the county commissioners and city council that weren't in agreement on how the property should be used, I think. But that's since gone away. But I just want to clarify since I brought it up. I think with respect to the special use permit, with the one exception of the one provision that really is the issue with the variance, I do fully wish we could easily approve this. The problem with the variance is that we're being asked to make what is not a legal decision, but what's a political decision, because there isn't any way in which this application satisfies the elements of the variance. The only problem is that they don't want to pave the lot. There's not a legal impediment of any form, and there's not a site-based impediment of any form to carrying out a use authorized under the zoning ordinance, which is what variances are intended to remedy. If they could point to some condition of the parcel itself that prevented them from carrying out a legal use, then we could grant a variance. But that's not the case. We're a quasi-judicial body. Our role is to apply the law as written. And again, what we're being asked here is to tell one user, and we would not even consider this application if it were anybody else, I don't think. And I think that the only legitimate way to deal with it is to deny it and have the city council make the decision, because that's their role. That's what they're intended to do. It's not our role to make political decisions. And that's what this is. It's a rezone, in effect. I wish that weren't the case, but that is the case.
Marshall?
Well, I'd like to comment a little bit on that. It's my opinion that an application for a conditional use permit shouldn't be turned down. It can just be conditioned to make it work. And Jerry had a problem with the variance, and it's his opinion that the criteria isn't met to make a variance. And I would say that there are other situations involved which we could look at. There's drainage problems out there, there's sewer lines out there, there's storm drains out there, there's existing buildings out there trying to establish grades. So I think there is sufficient reason and good common sense why that parking lot shouldn't be paved at this time, especially if we expect that there's going to be a new structure out there in the next few years. I think it makes sense to me to wait and not pave that parking lot at this time until that structure has been completed, and then get all the grading so that it works for everybody.
I actually agree, and that's been one of the reasons why we've let the parking slide, and then there was the requirement for the 4 inches of 3/4 gravel or whatever that is. The third item that you didn't mention is how it's used the other half of the year, and that is not necessarily conducive to pavement. So until you know where the pavement needs to be, the permanent pavement for the permanent building, maintaining a gravel parking lot solves a lot of drainage problems. But the use and the buffer, I still think if the parking lot doesn't need to be paved, there's still no reason that the buffer can't be put in place. It benefits the north. It separates it from the residential, which is the point of a buffer, and it's not something that would have to be redone. It's something that would have to be done eventually anyway. And so to me, it would seem like a good faith item for the owner and or the applicant to figure out, who's going to foot the bill for it. But it has to be done eventually anyway, within the next 3 years. Why not now?
Mr. Chairman, I guess that was my point, is that we're twisting ourselves in knots trying to do something that we think is right, that the law does not allow us to do. And that the ordinance requires the lot to be paved. That's what it requires. And any chance I can get to quote my former boss, Don Burnett, when he was Judge Burnett, in a variance case, said, the legislative line having been drawn, the courts and administrative entities exercising quasi-judicial powers, that is us, are constrained to follow it. We don't have a choice. We have to follow the ordinance as written. The ordinance requires the lot to be paved unless the person can satisfy the elements of a variance. And there hasn't been any of the typical kind of argument, the kind of argument that variances require, that there is anything that they cannot do that everybody else can do. That's what variances are for. If your lot's too steep so you can't build a house, if it's too narrow, or if there's extra environmental setbacks, the types of things that prevent you from doing what everyone else can do, we can grant a variance. There are no unique conditions of the property that they can identify. It's big, it's flat, it's eminently buildable, with some issues that Marshall pointed out. It is part of the 100-year floodplain, I believe, and there are issues there, but that's not preventing them from creating a parking lot. And there's no undue hardship. There's no legal hardship of any form. And they have said, in fact, that they will pave the lot. So it's not that there's any issue with paving the lot. It's just they don't have the money to do it now. But that's not a justification for a variance. Everybody could make that argument. We'd have to grant variances for every single legal requirement. There's no way to squeeze it into the ordinance. And again, this is, I think, unfair to this board. It's not the applicant's fault. It's not the staff's fault. It's history's fault. But this is a decision the city council should make. The city council should say, if this use is important enough to the community, we are not going to require that provision. Because otherwise, we are rewriting the zoning ordinance, and that's not our job. I wish it were. I have a lot of things I would change, but that's not what we do. And to be clear, I really do want to approve this, but the law does not allow us to do it. The ordinance does not allow us to do it.
Do you have, what were the relevant criteria for the variance the last time? Do you have those in your minute book there?
Well, I know I didn't help write them. We did things kind of differently.
Well, but we would have addressed
You wanted the
The
criteria for
for the last one, because that would have
Yeah, I
talked
have
about
it right
the unique characteristics and the things like that. So
one of them, I think, the argument made during the hearing was that it's owned by the county, which of course isn't. Okay. The board finds that your unique arrangement for use of the property and the temporary nature and use of the structure are special conditions of the site. Latah County leases the property to the applicant on a limited basis. The applicant, Latah County, are in the process of negotiating a long-term lease of the subject property for the proposed use and the city has granted a temporary special use permit for the operation of the existing temporary facility for no more than 5 years. Due to this uncertainty of both the future of the fairgrounds and the temporary nature of the lease, use, and structure, the board finds that this is a unique situation which is not applicable to other properties within the same zoning district. So that's what we did last time. But again, that is all referring specifically to this owner and this use, which is not how variances are supposed to work. We're supposed to grant variances to the property, not to the particular owner.
That would imply that the property, that was my first point. That would imply that the property owner is the person that is responsible for this, not the applicant. Because usually it's the owner that's the applicant, not the leasee.
Well, it's a little bit unique here because the permit, the applicant is getting the permit, but you're right, the variance runs with the land.
You just said this was unique. Did you
No,
mean to
I
say that?
said, no.
I heard you, Jerry.
But again, I won't argue that the particular contractual arrangement might be unique, but we're not doing it with contracts here. It's whether this parcel is unique, and the parcel is not. It's just a flat. I mean, half the people in Moscow wish they had a parcel like this, because you can build anything on it you want. It's flat. For those of us who live on hills, really wish we had flat ground.
Sewer provider.
But
Annette, welcome to the board
Thank you.
tonight
It's
on a
been
while
quite
like this.
interesting.
Any thoughts? I mean, I know you're new to this, but
You can
you
see
haven't
where
been
they're
involved,
taking
so
it.
maybe a new, fresh perspective. Any thoughts?
Well, one thing I do remember reading in all the material that Becky gave me was that something along the lines of perhaps doing something in the best interest of the community shall overpower all these minute details in the law. That's something I remember. And it would make more sense to to pass this application. Like Mr. Mangini said, that the existing facility is breaking down, and who knows how long they can keep it going, if they can keep it going long enough for until they can afford to build the permanent facility. So rather than us shutting down such a positive contribution to our community, and of course it's nothing I would hope for that the existing facility break down before a new one can be built, but I think if that's the way the cards will fall, the longer we can keep something positive in our community, the better. And I definitely have not gotten in depth of the law as Jerry has. So
And you should.
I couldn't
Marshall?
argue with
That's
him
why
if
they
I
used to
tried.
have me down in the end.
Well, I appreciate what Jerry's saying about the law, and Jerry, I think you'd make a great judge for figuring out what the law says. But I guess I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'm at the end of the spectrum that says, what's the right thing to do here and how to make it work?
Right.
And the law is handcuffing us. So,
But see, there is a way to make it work, and I think it's a better solution. If we deny it, and it is really as valuable as everybody says it is, which I believe it is, then we put the decision in the place it should be, and the city council can fix it however they decide to fix it. And it could be a permanent fix. We might not have to deal with this. The reason it keeps going every 5 years is because we're trying to shoehorn it into a place it doesn't fit. But so we just had this problem with kind of a similar situation, and part of the reason I asked the Residence Street one that we had and then didn't have and then had again, and it didn't fit in the variance box, and so they sent it up to City Council, and City Council fixed it, changed the zoning ordinance to fix a problem that we weren't legally capable of fixing. And I think that's the best outcome here. I don't think this should be coming to this board. It is a political decision, because every argument that's been made here has been it's valuable to the community. We don't want, and I agree with all of those, but those are not variance arguments. Those are political arguments, and really good ones. And we should let the city council make the decision and be done with it. That's what I think we should do. And I think they'll make the right decision.
I agree with Jerry to a degree, but I'm
That's a slippery
a
slope.
little bit more frustrated and manipulative than Jerry is. I think rather than deny it and force the applicant to go to city council for a rebuttal, I'm inclined to approve it with conditions on the county as the owner and let them rebut it to the council.
Mr. Chairman? I was actually going in exactly that direction. Yay! We got two, maybe. It seems to me that the conditions for the special use permit are still quite valid, and the same recommendation for the special use for approval of the special use application apply here as applied before. And the problem is the paving issue. Well, I think that we should look at this with suggesting that the buffer, item 6 in the special use conditions, that be referred to the owner of the property, and that we suggest, for the reasons of the fact that this is a temporary facility. We're all recognizing it as a temporary facility. A new member, Annette, has said it may be a very temporary facility if the concrete stops holding hands out there. And so it seems to me that we can invoke the temporary quality and the fact that a permanent site for the eventual parking lot can't effectively be determined, effectively and economically be determined at this time, but that the owner of the property and the lessee, depending upon what the lessor and the lessee have agreed to, but that decision of who pays for that is in the future. So with that, I would like to move that we approve the staff's recommendations with the provision that item 6 of the special use application recommendation be directed toward the actual owner of the property, the real property owner, and that the other conditions remain with that, and that the provision involving the holding off of the paving remain, and that the variance be recognized at this time, and the recommendation be forwarded with the existing recommendations for the reason that it is a temporary building.
As a point of clarification, your motion is for approval of the variance, but the staff's recommendation, if I understand it right, is for the SUP.
Well, approval of the recommendation for the SUP application on page 15 of 16 of the staff's report. And then on page 16, the recommendation for the variance be the same, but with the acknowledgement that we're talking about this variance based only upon the permit for the special use and the fact that this is a temporary building, which raises the reasons for the necessity of the variance.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure Ann didn't get that, but so my question, and maybe this for Becky too, and Ms.
Shall we
Paul
try
here.
it one more time?
But it sounds like isn't that what it
Being
says?
recommended. Yes, that's what I was going to clarify. That sounds like you're just wanting to adopt what is suggested, what is recommended for the variance and the SUP.
Yeah, with one,
'Cause
with actually one further further comment on item 6, that it be clear that we are directing that to the actual owner of the real property.
Well, no, and item 6 says at the time of construction, and I think we're talking
about now.
right now.
Okay. So the way I understand it then is adopt staff's recommendation with the one exception of number 6 on the SUP condition, that be stated, that the type C buffer be required
At this time,
immediately.
yeah.
Okay.
But don't we have to move to approve, don't we have to have a motion for the variance first and then a motion for the SUP?
Yes.
Because it's contingent upon.
I think Linda's.
Jerry
I think
might be able to
it's
help with that.
All inclusive.
I was making
That's-
that
that's
as
what I
an
thought.
inclusive.
Right.
But the special use permit, one of the elements is that it be in compliance with all the requirements of the zoning ordinance. One of those is the paving requirement. And so we can't approve a special use permit
So we need to do the
without
variance first.
the variance. We have
Right,
to do the
which
variance
is what I'm
first.
saying is.
what she's
is
doing.
The variance, but the variance, as I understand it, has the 3 recommendations, 1, 2, 3 on page 16 of 16.
That's right.
And we're not changing those.
That's right.
Okay.
I should note that the property owner is not associated with the permit, and we are not able to require the property owner to do anything. The only way we can require it is to require to the applicant, who then can negotiate it with the property owner as part of the lease. But we have no jurisdiction over the property owner at this point.
Well, I think that we might have a couple of ways to get to the property owner in this case. So I believe that that's one of the reasons why I thought it would have been very helpful to us to have our lawyer here tonight. But I'm willing to throw that back in Rod's lap. Did we get a second out of that?
Not yet.
Do I have a second?
Still,
You still thinking?
I'm still processing.
Fair enough. If I'm not mistaken, doesn't in the SUP, doesn't one of those actually references property owner, not applicant? Does it not?
It does not. It just references the proposal. The proposed use is all that it speaks to.
Mrs. Paul, how would it be possible to get the owner to do something when there's already a lease agreement between the lessor and the leasee?
We have 2 governmental entities here who actually do talk to one another. And I think that the necessity here would encourage some conversation between the city's attorney and the county attorney.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was thinking on a private field
Actually, it's
rather
the-
than a government field. So
That
yeah,
would be
sorry.
Bill Thompson.
It's the variance. 1, 2, and 3 actually state property owner. So maybe someone could make a motion that forces the property owner as part of the condition.
Where does it speak to the property owner? I'm reading it that it's just the property for the variance
Number 2,
criteria.
page 14 of 16. Because of the aforementioned special conditions of the property, would application of the provisions of the zoning code impose undue hardship and deprivation
Okay.
the property owner of rights commonly enjoyed by owners of other properties similarly situated in the same zoning code, which in my mind means that property owner, any other property owner, would be required to put in a type C buffer, would it not?
So this is the point I was making earlier. A variance is a condition of the parcel itself and runs with the land. It treats every property owner as if it's a single property owner. So everybody, that's why I said you can't consider who the property owner is. It's a condition of the land itself. Whereas a special use permit is held by the applicant, and they could sell it to whoever they wanted to, assuming their lease allows it. But the variance would stay with the land itself. So that's why the idea of a temporary variance actually makes no sense, because it's supposed to be a condition of the parcel that requires the variance. But that's the reason for that language. And again, this goes back to variances are designed to remedy situations in which the condition of the parcel prevents the owner from doing what everybody else in the district can do. And that's not the case here. And I think Linda's argument about governments talking to each other, I think is precisely the reason that this is a city council decision. I mean, this is for them. This is not for us. It's much, much easier for them to deal with it. They just changed the ordinance. It's a piece of cake. We don't have to worry about this.
So the motion dies for lack of a second, then, Joe?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Do I have a new motion?
Yes, I move that we deny the variance with that recommendation that denial be appealed to the city council as soon as possible.
Do I have a second?
You can say it dies, I don't care. You don't have to wait.
I don't hear a second, so I guess I'm looking for someone else to provide a motion.
You should note it is going to be extremely difficult to write relevant criteria and standards for this variance. Impossible. That would if it were appealed, that would stand up. That's just, I don't know how you do it.
Well, we'll give it a try.
Fair enough. I'm not expecting it to stand up. I'm expecting it to get appealed because it needs to be. But how it gets there is what we're struggling with.
Well,
Marshall?
maybe the parking lot and the new structure will be built before it gets appealed.
Yeah, they would hear it probably by, next month? They hear them the
Oh.
city council would hear it pretty
Okay.
fast.
I move approval of the variance, and I don't have any special conditions added on it, and I think there are special conditions and circumstances in this case that make the variance make sense to me, and that it is, as near as I can tell at this time, a short duration of about 3 years.
And do you move the approval?
Oh,
of the other?
and move approval of the relevant and criterion standards as presented by staff.
I'll second it.
Does that include the special use permit as well?
No, it's a set.
Just
this
the
is-
variance. Just the variance.
This is
The variance.
a motion and a second
For the variance.
for the variance as written and no special conditions? Or did you say the conditions that the city had?
Conditions as presented by staff.
Okay.
And that's what I thought I was seconding.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. I'm going to go down the line.
Aye.
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 Nay.
Aye.
Aye. It passes 4-1.
Now, a special use permit.
Or 5-1. 5-1.
5-1.
I thought I counted wrong. Can't count 6 people. Uh-oh. Gotcha. No, 5-1, and it passes. Okay.
So I have a
Special use
question.
commit.
Okay, I have a
Oh,
question
question.
about. No, this is about continuing on. So, condition 2 of the special use permit, and board having just dealt with the ordinance problem, I guess I will have to support the special use permit since I said I would. But it has this identical language about failing to progress with the construction and completion of a permanent facility in a diligent and expedient manner. And as we have just seen, that standard is relatively meaningless because we did not require any real evidence of progress toward construction and completion of a permanent facility. And so the question I have is, if we really want this to be 3 years, then we need to make that more real. or we have to accept that the next time in 3 years we'll be hearing this again. And unfortunately, I just got appointed again, so I will still be here.
Well, and that's why in that language, I would like to see, because it sounds like we struggled really hard to approve the variance, so it's unlikely that we won't approve the SUP. However, I think that the type C buffer needs to happen immediately. I also think that the sound, the hours of operation, I think that should reference a yearly time frame. So if there are things that are related, obviously the fair is an exception, but things occurring inside the building that aren't necessarily ice skating or hockey related should still be subject to those same sound.
Joe, you had said that, and you were, I think, concerned that the PA system should be limited 9 to 9 during the season, but I read condition 5 to be year-round. So regardless of who's there, whether it's winter, summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read that, understood that to be a year-round.
Okay.
Or kind of like a permanent condition.
Taken care of,
Yeah.
Okay. If we all have that understanding, that's fine.
Should also note there's a typo in number 3. It should read, I believe, the second clause, Sunday through Thursday, 6:15 a.m. to 12 a.m.
Yeah.
Right. And as I noted, I'm happy to move approval, but I do want to address number 2, if anybody else cares to. Are we going to add any language about so we don't just do this all over again in 3 years? I mean, we're going to require that.
You would look at this, and it's pretty stringent language.
We didn't enforce it.
Yes, it is. So.
Well, it does say this SUP, not any SUP.
Well, and I would look at it like this, too. I mean, we're talking about upon completion of the permanent ice rink facility, it might take a year to build.
Well, that was the point of the progress with the construction of the permit. We had that very thing in mind. 'Cause we didn't want to have paid an architect, actually created the plans and submitted, right, to have all that in play and then have it disappear.
Can you, can we define what the start of construction is? I mean, you had talked about a shovel in the ground, or, there's the planning stage and then there's the actual.
How about the application?
So if I may, with CUPs currently, the applicant has 1 year from the date of approval to initiate construction, and we see that as pulling a building permit or any type of construction activity, preliminary work, site work that needs to be done. If that activity is occurring within that year, then the CUP does not expire.
Okay.
But you have to hire an architect to get a signed set of drawings to apply for a permit.
That's
a cost they're going to have to incur.
Correct. Which would be satisfy the requirements. That's kind of what we expected we would see today.
Right.
So,
and I guess I don't have a problem if they have to come back in 3 years, and then we'll see how their fundraising is and see how close they are. They might be ready to go for it. So I really don't have a problem with number 2.
That, and I think the difference this time versus the previous times is we're forcing them to do something now. And that hasn't occurred in the past.
So what are we forcing them to do now?
The type C buffer.
That hasn't been voted on yet.
That's not true. Actually, we required them to put in a sidewalk last time, and they did, in fact, put in the sidewalk. Yeah.
Well, I think it's
Google
time
Maps it today,
for
but-
them to pull that permit within 3 years. And I think that's going to require hiring that architect within 2. So that this project really is moving forward.
Do you want to say that do you want a condition upon a permit being pulled in 3 years instead of this kind of vague language that?
Well, that's basically what you were saying. That's exactly what conditional use permits require now. Any other one. So I'm saying let's treat this one as we would treat any other special use permit.
It's slightly different, though, because when we grant a CUP, they have a year or the CUP expires on its own. They have to have done something with a year, and then once they've done it, it never
in this
expires.
case, you're just extending that to 3 years. Instead of 1 year, it will have 3 years to pull a permit or initiate
Yeah.
construction.
But it should be done within 3 years.
So it's a matter of saying that they initiate construction within those 3 years, or pull a permit, or act on this on the SCP maybe, or however you want to.
I mean, it's different because we're approving a temporary use, and we're talking about conditioning the continuation of the conditional use, or the special use permit on another activity. So it's not analogous necessarily to that situation, because in that situation you have blank ground, right? And
Right.
their conditional use permit requires that they do something within the first year for it to become permanent. Here, we're granting one that we want to end in 3 years unless they've done something, at which point it becomes permanent. And so what I think is the third sentence, should the applicant fail to initiate construction within 3 years of this approval, and then delete
Or fail to progress.
the rest of that independent or dependent clause. So it just says, should the applicant fail to initiate construction within 3 years of this approval, this SUP shall be immediately terminated and all use of the subject ice rink facility shall cease. And then initiate construction can be interpreted the way that Becky's talking about, right? Because that's how you say they must initiate construction within a year, and that means pulling a permit, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So, this is what I have. I'm going to move approval of the SUP adopting the relevant criteria and standards proposed by staff and the conditions, the 9 conditions in the staff's report with the following 3 changes. The first is to delete that provision in paragraph 2, and it says, or fail to progress with the construction and completion of the permanent facility in diligent, expedient manner. To fix the typo in 3, so the hours of operation on Sunday through Thursday are 6:15 a.m. to 12 a.m., understanding that 12 a.m. is the start of the following day, right? And then number 6, I believe this is Joe's, to delete the first part of 6 up to where it says the applicant. So number 6 would now read, the applicant shall install a type C buffer, etc.
That's what it says now.
No,
No, it says at the time of construction.
So that would
Okay.
pose a requirement to get something moving right now.
Right. And that something right now is in benefit to the residents on the north.
that, in case you're wondering, that's why we didn't allow the parking on that side. Was
Yeah.
because of the. And did you get? All right. So that's move approval with adopting all the staff's recommendations for conditions and relevant criteria and standards with those changes as noted.
I have a
second
motion.
that.
I have a second. I'll go down the line again.
We have some discussion.
We can if you want to.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So, well, I'm in favor of the motion, all except for number 6. And my reason for not being in favor of that is because I think that we're trying to put the cart before the horse. I think that we're trying to do a type C buffer there, and it says, including a 4-foot solid fence along the northern boundary of the property adjacent to Harold Street to extend the full length of the parking area and the facility development. We don't know what that is. We don't have permanent plans yet. We have renderings. We don't know what the parking lot design is, or the length or the width of the parking lot, because we have to make it larger, because it's, as Becky said, it doesn't include enough parking space at this time. And also, when we talked about they don't have to pave the parking lot at this time, and so we don't even know what the grades are at this time, and now we want them to put curbs and buffering out there, but we don't know what the grades are, or how long it's supposed to be.
It doesn't say curbs, does it? It says a 6-foot buffer
That's
or type
usually
C
how
buffer.
they differentiate between the parking lot and the buffer strip.
Well, there wouldn't be any parking. The conditional or the special use permit prohibits any parking on the Harold Street side, so there wouldn't be any parking over there.
But it says a solid fence along the northern boundary of the property adjacent to Harold Street to extend the full length of the parking area and facility development.
So as you look at the
So it would, anything to the west or anything to the east. So my problem with it is we don't know what we're asking for at this point.
What we required, and so we required the sidewalk to go from the Harold Street entrance to
To the end of the temporary facility.
the end of the temporary facility, and so right now it extends basically to,
Here, I'll go to the current aerial. Which you can't see very well, but
it looks like it just goes to the edge of the building more or less.
it does.
So one way to remedy that is to have, I mean, you could stage it if you were worried about it. It could extend to the end of the sidewalk, you know, with any extension as required when the permanent facility is constructed, if we wanted to. This is Joe's idea. Joe, you come up with it.
I still stand with my reasoning, and I'll further it by saying, if the type C buffer goes in now, that landscape's going to get established prior to construction, and you've been on a construction site more than I have, and that's going to be even of more benefit to the residents on the north, because now it's solving a sound problem and a site problem while this is under construction. So I stick with my recommendation. No.
Becky, can you show us the picture of the ground picture from the east?
The proposed elevation or the?
No, the current.
I don't have an elevation. Oh, yes, I do. I'm sorry.
You have allowed specific questions. We're into it. We can't take any additional information at this point.
You could do some clarification.
From the east side, the other.
So if, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
Perhaps we could reword the ending of that condition to not state the full length of the parking area and facility development, but just state along the northern boundary of the property adjacent to Harold Street. We know that because of another condition, there's not going to be any parking between the facility and Harold Street.
You're going to have a 20-foot setback.
And there's a setback, and buffers are typically applied along the property line, so they know to stick to the property line, and then the building would be set back further from that. So maybe some rewording at the end of the condition, maybe.
Well, I don't know if it's required, because as provided, the special use permit requires the type C buffer the full length of the development. And right now, the development goes to the end of the sidewalk, right? Which is basically in line with the, I guess that's the chiller sitting out there, so a little bit past where the sign is.
Yeah.
And then if the,
Yeah,
here's the
I
sidewalk.
don't
Yeah,
show
it's
it.
just it's right off the screen to the right. And then if the development extends further to the east, then the type C buffer gets extended further to the east. I mean, I don't think that it's, and they're not going to change the grade there on the sidewalk if they already constructed.
Joe, can I ask a clarification question of a member of the audience? Because it could affect utilities also.
Everything about this is atypical, so I will open up the public hearing so that the fairgrounds person can come up here and make a clarification for one of our board members.
Thank you. That means anybody else who wants to can participate.
I will have to offer that option too.
James Logan, Fairgrounds Director, 1301 Lundquist is my address. I didn't speak earlier for or against because I'm neutral, but I do have a very big concern about putting in, doing this action, requiring this buffer to be put in now, because that is a absolute critical.
Point of order, excuse me, sir. We have a motion on the table at the moment, and it is wholly out of order to reopen the public hearing with the motion on the table.
Yeah.
You could table it and then reopen the public hearing.
Can I ask a clarification?
I don't think you can hear any additional.
We're going to table the motion.
No, you have to.
We're going to table the motion.
I move to table the motion.
Do we have a second to table the motion?
A second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Please continue, James.
Reopen the public hearing.
Thank you. By requiring this action now, will have a very serious impact on the operation of the event center, the fairgrounds, and the county fair. So I didn't realize that would be part of the actions of the board tonight, would be to immediately require the start of construction of a very large barrier in the middle of land that we use for events and the fair and the fairgrounds.
So we'd like to respond to that
that's
with a
just my-
pointed question.
Yeah.
At what point does it become feasible for the fairgrounds to install that buffer while, I mean, we've been going 16 years now.
Yeah.
At what point do you pull the trigger and say, okay, it's all right to start development? That has to happen. We're just saying we want it to happen now, rather
Correct.
than in 3 years.
I would rather wait to make sure the ice rink's going to be permanent before we start putting in other permanent structures.
We've been debating that all night long. We don't know in 3 years if it's going to be
Correct,
permanent.
and I don't have the answer. As the fairgrounds director, I have no idea when the ice rink's going to become permanent. But the loss of the land where the buffer is going to be will have a permanent, immediate impact to the operations of the fairgrounds as a whole. And, you know, I hope that and I do support the ice rink becoming permanent, but if it doesn't, then I've lost a bunch of usable land immediately for no purpose. So I'd rather see them come together as designed by the previous conditional use permits and variances, that buffer would be required with construction of the permanent facility,
Mr.
rather than
Chairman.
separating them, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Question. Marshall.
Jim, it's my understanding also Avista Utilities is going to do some work along the boundaries of the fairgrounds. Is that correct?
Yes, I met with them just yesterday.
Okay.
Linda?
Well, I have a question. What inconvenience would this cause?
Loss of carnival space, loss of camping space, and loss of picnic space for vendors and participants at the fair, and loss of my permanent picnic area that's attached to the back of the event center.
So what kind of space are we talking about?
Well, if
Square footage?
I'm not going to even hazard a guess on that. But I'm assuming, based on, from sitting in the audience, that the entire area between the current building and the road, you're going to put a buffer right down the middle of that, based on the one
That's
drawing.
not the case.
It's only required to be 10 feet wide, and it would need to be along the property line, so 10 feet from the property line towards the building. Which there's a lot more than 10 feet.
There is, without an actual visual, so all right, so where it's going to be right next to the sidewalk then? Where the trees, so we're going to take out the trees there?
No,
and
we're not
put
going
it-
to take out any trees.
Okay.
The property line probably sits back a couple feet from this side of the sidewalk. It's probably right around in here somewhere. So 10 feet, I would estimate, is about right there. And it would run all the way from where this building starts out until that building stops.
Okay.
10 feet in width.
Rebecca, it would basically be continuing that
Too much.
tree line.
Because we are talking about, in addition to a fence, we're talking about trees and plants, right?
And a 4-foot solid
And
fence.
a 4-foot
yeah.
fence. And those trees would count.
Yes,
Or would
those
they
could
count?
count towards the buffer. Although those aren't in line with the structure, I don't think.
They keep going down. a
Oh,
ways.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, well then maybe my concern's not warranted, just without a good description of what
Sure.
a type C, B, A, whatever it is.
And if you-
I got a little nervous.
Fair enough.
So
you.
you did.
This is also, we should note, part of the, I mean, they've sort of given up when they signed a 50-year lease, right?
Yes. Not to belabor this part of the meeting any longer, but since I did open it up for the public for one, it is only fair to allow comment from anybody else sitting here who's not waiting to start the next process. Okay, seeing none, I close the public hearing again.
I move that I believe the phrase is remove from the table the previous motion that I made.
Yeah, I'll
That's how that
second that.
works. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Now we're back to a clean slate. Now, someone care to make a motion?
It's on the table.
It's
Or
on.
not on the table.
it's-
Oh, we have
to
It's
redo
that
it?
motion.
No.
All
We
right,
just pull
all
it
right,
off the table.
fair enough. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second.
Would our secretary be able to read the motion back? Good luck.
No, but I think I know what it is.
Have that long moved approval of the SUP and the relevant criteria and standards developed by staff, and the conditions recommended with the changes as noted. And you're deleting the phrase in condition number 2, fixing the typo in number 3, and deleting at time of construction phrase in number 6.
That's my understanding of the motion in the second.
And the phrase deleted number 2 is, or fail to progress with the construction and completion of the permanent facility in a diligent and expedient manner. That's the part that's being deleted.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second.
Yes. Aye.
I want to support the special use permit, but I can't support
6.
the change in number 6.
Are you a nay?
Nay.
I agree with Marshall. I think I'm a nay on numbers. Nay as well.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye. So it fails. 2 to 3. So
Tie vote.
I didn't
3
catch
to
the
3.
vote. What was
No.
What was the vote?
It was tied.
It's tied.
3-3. That's
I had a hard time counting.
It fails.
Yeah, but a tie, as I understand it, does not pass.
Correct.
So it doesn't.
You had that part.
Yeah. Got half of it right. Okay.
So, note again, we
3-3.
required 5 years ago that they build a sidewalk, so the requirement that they do something now is not unprecedented.
And this is, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is not onerous at all. And we just heard with a little more information, Mr. The representative of the fairgrounds acknowledged that, perhaps his initial concern was overrated because he didn't really understand exactly what the buffer was. So I fail to see that there's a significant problem here.
I'm assuming that there's nothing we can say at this point that will change your minds.
Well, let me ask a question. When
I think there is.
when we're talking about the immediacy of starting to install something, does that follow the same timeline as what we were talking about with the pulling a permit? Or when does that actually happen?
All I can do is speak to that one year time frame with a normal CP. It would certainly probably be helpful if the board did put a date that buffer be installed. Otherwise, I would have to look to the leadership in my department to determine what immediately means.
Can we condition that to be installed in the next 36 months? Kind of as a compromise?
Well, then then there's
1
no
year.
point because this
Well, no,
SCP
but I
is
mean,
over in 36
no,
months.
but what we just got done saying on number 2 is if they pull a permit within 3 years, then they're good to go, right? The building can take longer than the permit.
So,
Did I misread that?
we're getting the 3-year, pulling the permit within 3 years converts this to a permanent SUP. What we're granting right now is a temporary SUP and conditioning the temporary SUP. And so if we want it to be part of the temporary SUP, it's the 3-year period. I mean, we can make it be due in 3 years, and then it's just part of the other one.
Would it be helpful if I read the requirements of a Type C buffer?
Absolutely.
Yes,
I was
please.
actually going to ask you that because my understanding is that any construction, once something starts happening on this, because of its use compared to the bordering use, a buffer is required. Is it not?
Depending on the zones that it's adjacent to.
They're in the
Sorry.
same
So,
zone.
yeah.
Yep, they're in the same zone, so there would, let me double check. There may be a requirement. So it states that all principal uses other than dwellings, which would apply to this use, shall provide a Type A buffer yard along any property line abutting property classified as R3. So zoning code would already require a Type A buffer yard. So I can read the differences in the buffers if you'd like.
So that's another requirement that we haven't enforced so far, the Type A buffer.
That is probably accurate, yes.
Okay, so if we do nothing at all, they technically have to do a Type A buffer?
According to what I just read.
And let's hear what a type
Okay,
A buffer
a
is.
type, so they're all number of plants per 100 feet in length. So I'm not, there was 1,100 feet of frontage on Harold, so that entire property line is 1,100. So I'm not sure what the facility length is, but the Type A requires 2 canopy trees per 100 feet, 4 understory trees per 100 feet, and 6 shrubs. Type B is 4 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 8 shrubs. And then type C is a little variation of each with 2 canopy trees, 3 understory trees, and 12 shrubs. So type C has the most shrubs, equal number of trees to type A, and only 3 understory trees, the fewest understory trees. So
we're talking about planting trees and shrubs and a fence.
yep.
And the difference, again, between it, so type A requires 2 canopy,
4 understory,
4 understory, and how many shrubs?
6 shrubs.
So it doubles the amount of shrubs. A C doubles the amount of shrubs and takes away 1 understory tree.
Yep.
But doubles the amount of canopy trees, right?
No, it's the
Same as 4.
Canopy stays the same for A and C. B requires 4 canopy trees.
I mean, so
That element would require them to plant 6 more shrubs per 100 feet and 1 fewer understory tree than they are already required to do.
Correct.
And we couldn't waive the type A requirement
Well,
without
but-
giving them another variance.
But the owner is the one who technically is supposed to be putting that buffer in, not our applicant. That's supposed to be existing already. Is that right?
Well, this says the applicant.
No, it's
Well,
part
but I
of the
mean,
special-
in the R3, as I understand it, in the R3, there's supposed to be a buffer there anyway. That
Yeah,
apparently
that probably
doesn't
should have
exist.
went in when the fairgrounds went in, but I don't know when
So,
this
I mean,
code
that's-
provision was added. It could have
So
been
it could
after
be
that.
that the owner, the owner's
And,
on that anyway.
and I don't have a problem with the type of buffer, the 4-foot fence. It's just the timing of it is what I have a problem with.
Oh, and the 4-foot fence. That's the issue.
And what would the purpose of the 4-foot fence be?
It just adds additional buffer from sound or lights from traffic, perhaps, in the parking lot, even though there wasn't.
Will
gonna
it
be a
really,
park-
though, because it's only 4 feet tall?
I think 4 feet does block headlights. I think it would.
Headlights, okay, I get that.
It's not sight obscuring, but it's.
Right.
Well,
You ready for a motion?
go for it.
I move approval of the special use permit with the conditions that staff has installed in here, with the conditions that Jerry had suggested on item 2 and item 3, and I'd leave the rest of the conditions as stated.
We have a motion.
I would second that because I was supporting you in this last time.
So we have a motion, we have a second. I have a question, a clarification question. Jerry, you might know. If C remains as is, they have to act upon this within a year, correct? So we haven't postponed this buffer.
That was my question.
You wanted to postpone it for 36
No.
months.
I-
and I'm saying it has to be acted upon within 12. Is that?
Well, my
Well-
question was, is there that same time frame that we're dealing with as we would, for example, you pull a permit within X number of times? So is there
Well,
something,
we're-
if we approve this doesn't happen tomorrow?
Right. You're approving the continuation of the temporary facility so that it doesn't shut down on July 26th. If you leave condition 6 the same as it's written, which is the current motion, is that at the time of construction, the buffer will be constructed. Previously, you'd said immediately. I should have asked for clarification on what does that mean. The board should specify if they're going to say immediately, they should give a date for that buffer installation. But the current motion, he said,
My current
Number 6,
motion is
the
as
language
stated
does not change.
in number 6.
Which means that buffer may not be in place in 3 years because construction may not
Right.
start.
Or
in 3
longer.
years. Just the process is started in 3 years.
Okay, but so we have an ongoing use, right? This is totally different than a typical special use permit where you anticipate that the use will not occur for a period of time. And I assume that before you grant, like, whatever the final approval is, you ensure that all the requirements are met, parking lots paved, and that buffers are put in? Mm-hmm. Meaning that as of July 26th, they would be in violation of the ordinance that requires the type A buffer.
yeah, but I don't think that was ever discussed when they originally went in. Like I said, I don't know when that.
But I know that. But if we grant the permit today, we're granting a new permit. I mean, this notion
Code
of
requires them to do a type A
would
buffer,
require to
yes.
do them a type A buffer before they can engage in the use. So technically, they would be required to have the type A buffer in by July 26th, or by the time they actually commence.
I believe so, but a lot of things have been based on history with this use, and historically that type A buffer has not been required. So
We should just
I can't
deny
say
the
for
whole
certain.
thing and let the council figure it out. But so, with that, I mean, to be clear, they are still required to put in a type A buffer, whatever
we do.
because unless you want to issue a variance for that one, which we can't do. So to be clear, I mean that is they still have to do something now. The only difference, we're not requiring the fence, which is probably that's a significant cost, and we're not. And then it's those 6 bushes and 1 fewer. So they're actually having to put in more trees.
Well, the buffering requirement wasn't there when the fairgrounds was built. The buffering requirement only came in when they built the temporary facility.
Right, but new codes come into play as soon as you make a change to an existing condition.
Well, and since this will be a change, I will be expecting to see plans for a type A buffer on July 27th.
Okay, so when
Won't
vote-
you, Mr. Chairman?
So I believe we had a motion and a second.
Yeah.
Is that
Motion
right?
in a second.
That's what you call it. I just want to make that clarification before we voted on it.
I guess I'll go down the line again.
I'll vote yes for more trees.
Aye.
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 That is 6. Counted right this time. That is unanimous. We are done with this item. Since this has taken a while, I'd like to take a 5 to 10 minute break, let people use the restroom, get a drink, and then we will start up with the next item. So with that said, if everyone can be back in here
At 20 past.
Yep, by
20
Well,
past is good. That's 7 minutes.
20
7 minutes.
past.
Okay, yep, by 9:20.
can read the signs. It says Linda Paul out there, I hope. I'm the vice chair now of this operation, and Mr. Bozzoli is going to absent himself from the board at this time, and we will take up the next item, which is a public hearing on a request for a variance and and I think it's and a conditional use permit. Rebecca, would you like to tell us all about it?
Sure would. Okay, so before your review, we have a conditional use permit and variance request at 1515 North Mountain View Road. The applicant, Logos School, is requesting a conditional use permit for a school and church for a parcel located within the moderate density single-family residential R2 zone in order to relocate their existing private school campus located here in Moscow to 1515 North Mountain View Road. The applicant is also requesting a variance from the maximum building height for the proposed school and gymnasium building. The development is proposed to happen in 3 phases. Phase 1 would include the public roadway improvements, including the extension of a public street, a creation of a new roundabout intersection, and the construction of a new public street. Additionally, Phase 1 would include installation of required utilities, site circulation, and parking. And finally, the construction of a track and field on the site is all part of Phase 1. Phase 2 would include the construction of the school building, and Phase 3 is proposed to include an addition to the school building, which would be the gymnasium, a church building separate from the school facility, not attached, and additional parking lots to serve those additional uses and special events. The proposed building height for the school and gymnasium is 46 feet to allow for a regulation-sized gym to host regulation sporting events, and the school building will match the 46 feet to allow for appropriate scaling of the building. Logos School operates on a traditional school schedule from mid-August through May, operating beginning at 8:15 a.m. to 3:15 p.m. for students and until 4 p.m. for staff. From June through mid-August, activity on the site would be summer camps, teacher trainings, and other similar activities. Also on the site year-round would be athletic and club practices and games in the afternoons and evenings. The subject property is located here, outlined in red. We have North Mountain View Road on the west. This is the west side on this side of the map, and then North Mountain View turns at a 90-degree angle and continues out to the corner of the subject property there. The yellow dashed line is the current City of Moscow boundary, so properties beyond that are all located within the area of city impact. This is East F Street here, just to kind of orient you a little more, and this is Mountain View Park. The property is located, as I have not mentioned yet, is in the moderate density residential single-family R2 zone. As I mentioned, this is the city limits, and so the adjacent surrounding properties to the north, the east, and the south are all within the area of city impact. This is the area of city impact boundary line, and those parcels are all located within the agricultural forest zone and currently used for agricultural purposes. Immediately adjacent to the west is, as I said, the Mountain View Park, and that is located within the farm, ranch, and outdoor recreation zone. And then further to the southwest is also the similar zone to the subject property, the moderate density residential R2, consisting of residential uses. As I mentioned, it's in the moderate density single-family residential R2 zone where schools and churches are a conditionally permitted use. The maximum building height in the R2 zone is 30 feet. Unless the side yard setback is exceeded, then up to 35 feet is allowed, with 1 additional foot in height allowed per 1 foot in exceedance of side yard setbacks. The proposed building exceeds the required side yard setback substantially, and it is also proposed to exceed the maximum height of 35 feet by a total of 11 feet, being proposed at 46 feet. The subject property is approximately 30 acres in size, It's on the edge of the city limits with the area of impact bordering the northeast and south property lines. The current site is vacant and has historically been used for agricultural use. The site is relatively flat with an increase in elevation in the southeast corner, and Paradise Creek flows near the northwest and southwest corners of the property, and consequently the 100-year floodplain extends onto the property in those areas. Mountain View Park to the west, I've already went over these uses. The ag land to the northeast and south, and then R2 to the further west. There's currently no existing vehicular or pedestrian access to the subject property, so the development would require extension of Mountain View Road, which is a minor arterial street, towards the subject property. It would also require roadway widening on Mountain View Road from Sloniker Drive to the new proposed roundabout intersection. This requirement is a recommendation by the engineering department in order to mitigate impacts generated by the increased traffic demand as a result of the development. The engineering department supports the construction of a roundabout at the new intersection.
Becky, with that widening of Mountain View, would it still be the same way now with just asphalt, no curb and gutters, and no sidewalk? Or
That's correct, yes. It would be widened to a 28-foot width with 12-foot drive aisles and 2-foot shoulders.
Okay. Would there be bike lanes or anything, or?
There would not.
And how wide is it currently?
Sorry, I do not have that information, but I assume it's less than 28.
Could you direct your questions through me to the
Sorry, I got Joe and I. Yeah, Ms. Paul, may I ask Becky a question?
Well, you already did, so but just
No, you're right. I apologize.
So the proposed new public street from Mountain View Road would be extended to the southern property line of the subject property, and this would include a bridge across Paradise Creek at the northwest corner, as the creek runs right at the northwest tip of the property. And this new public street provides for a future public right-of-way connection from Mountain View Road to F Street eventually, and eventually to D Street, in accordance with the City of Moscow 2009 thoroughfare plan. This new street will be required to meet minor arterial standards. There's proposed to be a southbound left turn lane for easy and safe access onto the subject property. And the development is proposed to have 2 one-way private streets that will circle around the school, and this is intended to relieve congestion on the public street and route traffic appropriately to accommodate peak drop-off and pickup traffic for the school. South of the property is a sewer maintenance road, is a proposed sewer maintenance road that will be constructed with access from D Street to the new public street. This will serve, as I mentioned, for the sewer maintenance, but also as a secondary access to the site for emergency access. Construction of the new pedestrian bridge across Paradise Creek at the southwest corner of the property is being suggested as a requirement by Public Works to improve pedestrian access to the site. And I'll point out all these different elements on the maps in just a moment. This is a plan showing the thoroughfare plan map that shows the future proposed street connection. This is the new public street that would be reconstructed from North Mountain View Road south to the south property line. And then, as you can see, it is proposed in the thoroughfare plan to eventually connect to D Street down here and have F Street continue through and also connect to that street. So just showing you that is in our thoroughfare plan. This is a map showing the subject property here, and with approximately a quarter mile and a half mile distances from the subject property, assuming that students that possibly live in this area that would walk to the school. It also points out the existing path is located here, and that new pedestrian bridge would be constructed right there at the tip of the southwest corner of the subject property. And the purpose of this is to show you that the majority of the residences in that quarter mile, half mile distance from the subject property would have probably the most easy pedestrian access would be from F Street, and then connecting to that pedestrian path to get to the subject property. So that is why the recommendation is to construct that bridge to improve pedestrian access to the site. This is the proposed site plan that was submitted by the applicant with the aerial image underlaid. This is Mountain View Road. This is north is to the left of your screen. This is Mountain View Road heading east with the new proposed roundabout intersection and then the new constructed public street that extends to the south property line right here of the subject property. These are the what I refer to as private streets, but it's really just the circulation pattern on the site. These would be a one-way around this way and one-way this way for queuing and drop-offs at the school. This is the proposed school and gymnasium facility, the track and field, parking lot, and the future church building. This black line here shows the sewer maintenance road that would connect to D Street for the sewer utility line that will run in that area. So zooming in a little bit just on the site, this is the same image without the aerial laid underneath. Just to give you a better look at the proposal. So as I mentioned, it's proposed to be developed in 3 phases. This is showing phase 1. This is blown up a little bit for your viewing, but this phase also includes the roadway widening of Mountain View all the way down to Sloniker Drive. As I mentioned, phase 1 includes all the public street improvements, right-of-way improvements for the new street, utility installations, and then also the on-site circulation and the track and field. Phase 2 involves the construction of the school facility. And then phase 3 is the addition of the gymnasium, the church, and additional parking areas. These are the building elevations submitted by the applicant. The top one is the north elevation, so that would be facing North Mountain View Road, facing towards that roundabout intersection. And then the bottom one is the west, so that would be facing Mountain View Park. And then the east on the top would be facing the area of impact area properties, and then the south elevation on the bottom would be facing towards D Street. And here's a proposed image of the school. And I'm certain that the applicant will talk more about the building materials and the style of the structure. These are some photos of the site today. This is from that southwest corner where the pedestrian path is located. This is approximately where the south property line is, and then the west property line continuing up north. This is looking from Mountain View Road right about where the proposed roundabout intersection would be located, so right at the northwest corner of the subject property. And here's looking from the Mountain View Park side, looking to the northeast towards Moscow Mountain, and then to the southeast. As is standard with any conditional use permit, it is reviewed by all departments within the city, and the engineering department did submit a memo that outlined comments and concerns regarding public streets, access, and utilities, and their recommended conditions of approval to address those concerns. That memo is included in the board's packet. The additional input from other departments, there was none really, but the development will be required to meet all applicable city code requirements as it pertains to the building, plumbing, electrical, and fire at time of the building permit issuance. Some additional considerations regarding the variance request. I wanted to point out that there have been 2 other uses similar to a school facility within the city of Moscow that have received approval for variance from the maximum building height. In 2003, the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center, located at 1724 F Street within the Farm, Ranch, and Outdoor Recreation Zone, was permitted to exceed the maximum building height by 13 feet, and their building height was 48 feet. In 2005, St. Mary's School and Gymnasium, located at 412 North Monroe Street in the moderate density single-family residential R2 zone, was permitted to exceed the maximum building height by just a small amount, approximately 1 to 2 feet. We have 7 criteria and standards for approval of a conditional use permit. They are the exact same for a special use permit. Since we heard those earlier tonight, I'm not going to read through each of those. But based on those relevant criteria and standards for approval of a conditional use permit, staff's recommendation tonight is to approve the application for a conditional use permit for a school and church as presented at 1515 North Mountain View Road with the following conditions. And These, as I stated, do come from the engineering department as their recommended conditions. Number one is that the water system shall be extended up to the site in a loop configuration to provide adequate fire flow, redundancy, and protection against poor water quality. Number two is that the sewer system shall be extended to the site. Number three, the development shall install the public streets as indicated in the adopted multimodal transportation plan, and the proposed road to the development shall be constructed to minor arterial street standards. 4 is that the proposed road shall be aligned so that a feasible connection to the F Street extension adjacent to the bridge can be completed in the future. 5 is that the developer shall widen Mountain View Road from Sloniker Drive to the proposed intersection to a minimum width of 28 feet from edge of asphalt to edge of asphalt. And 6 is that the developer shall build the roundabout shown on the site plan submitted for the conditional use permit as opposed to a stop-controlled or signalized intersection. And that the pedestrian bridge shown on the site plan submitted for the conditional use permit shall be constructed to provide access across Paradise Creek from the existing pathway to the site. Again, we have the 3 criterion standards for approval of a variance. Based on those criteria and standards, staff's recommendation is to approve the request for a variance from the maximum building height for the proposed school and gymnasium building, subject to the approval of the accompanying conditional use permit with no conditions. And I'm available for questions.
Linda, may I ask?
Do you have, I beg your pardon?
I do have a question.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Tell me about the roundabout as compared to a stop sign, or how did the roundabout end up? Why a roundabout, I guess, is my question.
You know, that's an excellent question, and I'm not the public works expert or the engineer that made that determination, but there was several, and perhaps the applicant can address it further because he was in those discussions with the public works staff, I believe. But all I can tell you is that they fully support that over a stop or signalized intersection, and they feel that it will function efficiently and safely. It has been reviewed also by the highway district for transporting of large implement vehicles. So hopefully the applicant can address that maybe perhaps a little bit more.
Thank you.
I don't believe the word fad was used, though.
Cool.
There any other questions for staff? Well, thank you very much. Let's get on to the applicant. And the applicant is invited to come up. Usually we have one at a time, but if you'd like to have a team, that's all right. Please state your names and addresses.
Larry Stevenson, 888 Panorama Drive.
I beg your pardon?
I'm Larry Stevenson, Superintendent of
Larry.
School, 888 Panorama Drive.
Scott Becker, Hodgin Associates, 405 South Washington.
Rudy Olson, 617 Pinecone Road, with Design West Architects.
Go right ahead.
Well, Logos School is very thankful and grateful for the time that it's had in Moscow City the past 35 years. And we're excited at the opportunity of having a facility that can house our students. We're currently at 400 students. About 7 years ago, we started looking at property, mainly because the board decided to go to 2 sections for each grade because we were growing, we were full. So we started with 2 kindergarten sections, realizing that on the little over 2 acres that we're on and the skating rink that we purchased at that time, 25 years ago from today, we were running out of space. And so we were going to be landlocked, and we started at that time to look at property within the entire city and outskirts of the city and the county. So it's been a long process where we worked with the county and the city trying to find appropriate parcels. So we were excited to find this piece. And so right now, those 2 sections from kindergarten are to 7th grade this year. And so we are doing some pushing and we're like sardines right now. So we were thankful for this piece of property that it came available to us, and we were able to purchase it with cash. And we secured Hodgin Associates and Design West Architects. We went through a vetting process on both of those situations. We chose Design West versus local And second, they've designed over 300 schools in a greater Northwest area. So they have a great background of designing schools. And working with the city and with the roundabout, the first thing that's a primary focus for us is safety of our students and the citizens of Moscow. And so we openly invited the city and the county and the State Department of Transportation and anyone else that they thought that could give us advice how best that we can put our school on this property and to create any accident from ever occurring. Right now, we think we've overdone that a little bit with a turning lane. Potentially would be a dead-end street to a gravel road. But thinking long-term with D and F Street, particularly when D Street comes through, as our property owner to the right of us, to the south of us, when he develops that property and that street comes through, I see the traffic going down D Street by McDonald Elementary School, that being a relief for that congestion there. And so we went ahead and put that left-hand turning lane at that point.
Yeah, and I'd like to just touch on a few of the, how we came about with the design that we did so far.
Excuse me for a second, Madam Chair.
Yes.
It seems for purposes of the audio recording, they should probably state their names before they speak.
I asked for that. This is Scott Becker.
Okay.
Yeah, Scott Becker, Hodge and Associates, 405 South Washington. So we looked at the layout and how to keep everything flowing the best. I'd like to just touch on the roundabout question that Mr. Monson had. The reason that staff prefers roundabouts in a possible congested area is because, for one, traffic is always flowing. You feel like you're getting somewhere. You're not stopped. You're not getting traffic stacked up. Sometimes roundabouts feel uncomfortable until you get familiar with them, but I think most people, once they do get familiar with the roundabout, they tend to like them quite a bit. You eliminate the possibility for T-bone type accidents too. If there is an accident in a roundabout, it's almost always a glancing accident, does some damage to the vehicle, but for the people in the vehicles, it's a safer intersection. So I don't want to speak directly for staff, but I know staff does like roundabouts to promote flow and safety. So that's where that came about. We're looking at widening Mountain View and improving that access all the way down to Slonaker as part of this project. Also access with the pedestrian bridge, and we're kind of concerned about the potential of being locked in with one access into the site, but with the utilities going to the south, there needs to be a utility maintenance and access road to the south, and we believe that will work as an all-weather road for emergency ingress-egress if there's something on site unforeseen that would require that. But once again, student safety is ultimately the most important thing here. The height variance, we would like to have a facility that can house, or that we can have tournaments in that area, possibly even serve as for district tournaments, but it has to be regulation, and for basketball and volleyball, the ceiling heights do require a little bit higher ceilings. So that's where the height variance comes in, and to have the gymnasium and the school match and look appropriate and aesthetically pleasing, that's we think it will look best if we can just tie those together and get that height variance. And then I'll see if Rudy has some comments, but otherwise I would gladly answer any questions that you may have of us.
Mr. Olson, would you like to say something?
I would, if maybe we could go to...
And put your name and address for the record.
Rudy Olson, 1617 Pinecone Road.
Which one did you want?
If we could flip to the renderings, or the elevations in the renderings. Basically, the school offers a classical education, and so they'd like for lack of a better term, collegiate Gothic type of look. So it's intended to be similar to some of the buildings you see on the University of Idaho campus, and it'd be brick veneer and some precast concrete and tall windows, and hopefully tie in with that and be a thing of permanence and in a classic style. And then maybe going back to the phasing drawings, and phase 2 would be just that portion of the building. There would be an interior courtyard. The long band across the top is a great, what they call a great hall, and what another school might be similar to a lunchroom or a multi-purpose room, but that goes in line with what they do with their educational program. And then and then the plan itself would be all the grades would be divided into, and there's a enrollment limit on the school too. It wouldn't get any bigger than what it is now. And then the phase 3 would be all the other amenities as fundraising allows.
Mr. Stevenson, would you like to wrap it up?
Yes, I would, please. Thank you. Larry Stevenson, 88 Panorama Drive. It is important for what we were trying to accomplish to do it well, and we want to go with what we think would be the long-term best use of this property, and we want to be able to share with other entities in this town that have been very kind to us in the past 35 years. The city and letting us use a great deal of their facilities for our outdoor programs. We don't have a field. We've never been to the campus at all. It's all concrete and gravel. There isn't a field for our kids now. It's been that way for 25 years. And the city's been very generous to us. The University of Idaho has been very generous to us. And the City of Moscow School District has been very generous to us. So this facility we want to share with our track. Hopefully we can do some combination of hosting some state track events. The gymnasium, we want it to be large. We do want to host some district tournaments and some state tournaments here. We want to have some capacities to be able to do that with coinciding with Moscow. Currently, our facilities aren't up to par to what a state committee would approve or a district committee would approve. And so our current facility is lacking in that. And we are competitive in our athletic programs as well as our academic programs. And we think this facility will help us to do that. The chapel area is we would love to have graduation, host our own graduation. We'd love to host our own Christmas programs. We would love for other churches to be able to use that facility as well, like we have done before. Just today and yesterday, I've had 2 people in the community asking about renting our current gym for weddings, where U of I was not available and other facilities were not available, and you want to use our facilities. So we would like to use that to help the community to host some of those activities. Thank you for your time.
Let's see if we have some questions from the board. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Stevenson or Scott, has the right-of-way for the road extension over to F Street and D Street, has it been procured?
Yeah, we have a verbal commitment for the easement for the utilities and access.
Okay. As far as the future road goes that would go through there, then what standard would that be brought up to?
As it continues to D Street?
Uh-huh.
Yes, it would be an arterial standard also.
A minor arterial?
Yes, a minor arterial.
And we say, in the long term, how long term are we thinking?
For this development or for?
Yes, for this development.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe as soon as funds are available, they would like to start bringing the elements to fruition.
Okay, great, thanks.
Other questions from the board? Yeah, Mr. Long.
So first, what is the minimum required ceiling height for the gym? If any such thing exists? Like,
well,
not on your plan, but the minimum required ceiling height for a gym of the type you want to construct.
From the floor, bottom of the floor to the bottom of the lights, 28 feet. So minimum to host a district event is my understanding. But that's a minimum. And so schools, committees would like for it to be a little higher than that. And so like St. Mary's, which was approved, it's a middle school gym.
Right.
You could not host any high school events in that gym.
And so this question, I don't mean to sound dismissive. My father was a landscape architect, my brother's an architect, so I understand design. But is it not really the reason for the request for the variance is primarily design-based then, isn't it? You have a design that you want that requires those sorts of roof lines? Because there's no other impediment to constructing a school out there. I mean, that's the design you want, and so it requires a 46-foot roof height. There's no other reason for that, is there?
Yeah, I think it is related to the gym. I think we could do a design that's a little shorter if we need to, still be in the Gothic style, but I think it does enhance it architecturally, makes it more beautiful.
It does. Well, I could say something. For example, the Hamilton Loeb Center that has a completely different design. It's a modern design, but yet that exceeds this building's height by a couple more feet. And part of this is the width of these boxes too, and the school itself. I mean, then you have with that kind of a slope, it's going to be taller, and with the gym, there's a truss structure that you have in addition to the minimum height to the bottom of the lights, and so that's part of it.
But a gym of that height, if you have, so you don't have a flat roof on it. A lot of high schools have flat roofs on their gyms. I mean, you could have a regulation-sized gym with a flat roof that would potentially not exceed the 35 feet. Then.
Yeah, if you like flat roofs.
Oh, I don't. But I mean, that's not the question we're asking, unfortunately. And then the design of the rest of the building is the same height, again, simply so it looks right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Scott, could you address any floodplain issues there?
Yeah, we are in the floodplain in a portion of it where the bridge goes. Obviously, that would make sense that is in a floodplain, and the roundabout also is in that area. We're working on right now. We're modeling the floodplain to flow through the bridge so that there's no rise in the floodplain. But the area of the structures are outside of that floodplain area. There's a portion of the road that will just be raised up above the floodplain, so that if there were any flooding, the road would still be wide open and fully usable.
So the area where the structures are, they didn't need to be raised in elevation?
That's correct. The structures are well out of the floodplain area.
Great.
Other comments from the board? I have a couple of questions. I'd like to return to the building height question. If you designed, and I guess this is for Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson, if you designed the gymnasium and related buildings and probably the church when it comes along, you would be able to meet any minimum height requirements for tournaments and that kind of thing with a 30-foot tall building, would you not?
I'm not sure 30 feet. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to construct a building.
What do you believe would be the minimum height for that you could construct a gymnasium that would meet tournament requirements on that flat area, mind you?
I can't answer that exactly off the top of my head.
Okay. Can you justify 46 feet?
Well, I might be able to step in here too. Along with the lighting, you also have mechanical. And to have mechanical, yes, you could probably get some of the mechanical up on the roof. You'd still exceed the height limit, but it would also look very industrial. And I don't believe the neighbors would like to see an industrial prison-looking complex out there.
Oh, I'm sure they would, but I think that there are other design solutions that you could consider, and one of them is underground.
Well, if we do get underground, the further we go, there is water table issues. We would definitely want to be above that and not get into a situation where we are running sump pumps all the time just for a building height reason.
And I had another question. Actually, it was for you, Scott, about the roundabout question. Where is the source that tells us that people love roundabouts? Can you point that?
No, and I don't want to say people love roundabouts. I say people can get used to roundabouts.
We can get used to a great deal of things, but
no, they are safer. There are studies. The Federal Highways Administration does have a number of studies.
Could you cite a couple? I mean, just give me one.
Well, if you just go to the Federal Highway Administration website, you can type in roundabouts, and they'll give you the statistics. And
You know, I've done that, and what I find on that is not a chorus of acceptance, but it works well in certain areas and not so well in other areas. I'm not sure this is one of those areas, is I guess what I'm concerned about.
And to a point, we wanted to do, as much as staff recommended. We are trying to get this project off the ground and going. We're not trying to make waves or argue with staff. I believe the roundabout is appropriate, and staff does also. But I'm not.
So are you telling us basically that this was really staff's idea?
That's correct.
Thanks. Well, that clears that one up.
May I ask another question?
Go ahead.
This is kind of a follow-up. I like roundabouts too, but other than cost and the moisture issues you're talking about, are there impediments to having the floor of the gym be below grade? Like significant impediments? I mean, I recognize that moisture concerns would be more significant.
The flooding would be the primary concern, just because you start getting down to the same level as the stream, and then you're running into that issue. We could raise the site up,
right,
so that the ground would be at the finished floor elevation, but it kind of defeats the purpose. The elevation, if you were just to take the elevation of the floodplain and compare it to the top of the roof, it's going to be the same height as what you are.
And I'd add you also run into a lot of issues with the wood court floors, and a lot of moisture problems can do big damage.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the venting would come up as far as the heating and the cooling if you come from underneath the ground. Most gyms that I've been in, and I've been in a lot of gyms, is the venting is above lights where the heat and air conditioning come out, and not in the ground. I'm not sure where you would put the vents on the basketball court out the basketball court.
Other questions or comments from the board? Thank you very much. And we'll open this now to anyone who would like to speak in favor of this project. So y'all come. And please begin your testimony with your name and address.
Hello, my name is Daryl Faircloth, and I live at 818 Ford Street. Along the bike path, have a pretty view of Mountain View Park. And I guess I don't know what the appropriate time is to speak, but I'm not saying I'm against the project. I'm not saying I'm for it. I just have some considerations that I would like to throw out there. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time, or I should step
Well,
down.
strictly
or-
speaking, it's not the appropriate time, but we'll let you go ahead now, and we'll keep that in mind when we ask for opposition.
So I'm here in regards to the conditional use permit and allowable height for the proposed Logos School. Several concerns. While the project proposes to install a roundabout on Mountain View Road, certainly the shortest path for vehicles traveling to and from the school to drop off will be on F Street. And currently, the school year exists a fair amount of traffic due to McDonald's School, the charter school, the junior high school, and then there's also some school bus pickup drop-off locations along F Street. So I'm not very clear if F Street will punch through at some point. As far as a traffic bridge, from what I've heard today, sounds like D Street primarily, but that's just a concern I've had. With this new development, it seems like a stop sign will be needed to be placed at Mountain View and F Street because it's already difficult to cross during school time. So we have a four-way stop at D Street and Mountain View, F Street, and Mountain View seems like that would be appropriate consideration. As far as Mountain View Road goes, it'd be truly unfortunate if the current undeveloped portion of Mountain View Road North is not provided with the sidewalk, street improvements, bike lanes as part of this project. Sounds like they're going to widen the asphalt and 2-foot shoulder, but nothing there. It's just we see this time and time again in Moscow that we do these developments that are partially done, and then it takes 15 years to get new sidewalks and bike lanes put in. So those are just other observations I've had with that. Currently, Mountain View Park is a dog park. There's people that worked hard to get that. I'd hope that their efforts on that wouldn't change in terms of the development of a school adjacent to Mountain View Park. And then I have a question is, once this is approved for a school development, later down the line, could residential be added to this property or
To the subject property
subject
itself?
property itself once it's
well,
approved as a...
Is that something that could happen, Becky?
Not that it will, it's just a question.
I would imagine with the subject property undergoing a conditional use permit, if it was approved, any changes to the site would require an amendment to the conditional use permit.
And I guess I would amplify that. If the application before us tonight is for this property for this use, and if there were to be a change in that use, it would come back to us.
Great. And then...
May I comment on that really quickly, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
That's totally true. However, the parcel is certainly large enough that it could be subdivided and additional structures could be placed on that north, it looks like.
But it would go through another process, though.
Yeah. Okay. But it is possible.
Okay. And then in regards to the height increase, I think it's unfortunate the initial article in the Daily News announcing this proposed project noted the buildings would hold low roof lines to respect views from other people's properties, that type of thing, and then to learn later that we're kind of going huge. As you know, we're talking 1,200 seat chapel, gymnasiums. I understand that part, but in a sense, the school portion could be kept to a one-story facility and still be collegiate, and it would cost more land development around the gymnasiums and stuff, and understanding those need certain heights, but I would hope that would be taken into consideration. And my example would be McDonald's Elementary School. It's a one-story building. They have a gymnasium, and it looks pleasing for the most part. So Lena Whitmore would be another example, other than their gym is very small, and it's by no means set up for any kind of sanctioned athletic programs. So I guess with that, that's my comments, considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Faircloth.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this project? Last call. Okay, it's now time to shift the burden to those who would like to oppose the project. So anyone who'd like to speak in opposition, please come up and give your name and address, and we'd be happy to hear from you as well. Don't tell me y'all just came for the fights tonight.
My name is Marilyn Lisso here Coates, and I live at 824 Ford Street. And I'm not opposed to education, and I'm not opposed to the religion, and I'm not opposed to children and learning. But this is a iconic, beautiful view in Moscow, and I can see it being developed. It'll be developed, but the height, I have a problem with the height. And I think that when they said Gothic, that it's because of the classical education, etc., I think that we have a problem with form to what the function of this space is being used for. Is the form isn't really following the use of the landscape. We were in the flood in the 90s, and where the street is that they're going to put in, and the chapel, that was all flooded. And I know that they're going to, up to my knees. It flooded that plane first before it came into onto the bike path. And I just think that, to go out and hear, like yesterday I went out and the crows were all gathered in the trees, and the birds I could hear, and I looked at the mountain and I thought, well, I'm not going to see you if this 46-foot height gymnasium and chapel go in. And I know I'm just one person, but I think Moscow, and I think that Logos understands this also, because I think that their aesthetics for the beauty of where we live and trying to make it so that they not only build a school, but they're also being sensitive to the landscape. Frank Lloyd Wright did it very well, and I don't think that you have to have a Gothic school in order to have a wonderful education. I think that you can build something that really preserves some of the beauty of the land that we have in Moscow, Idaho. That mountain is an iconic view, and we will not see it anymore once this 46-foot height chapel and gymnasium and school. And I can understand the concerns for the chapel. For the gymnasium. I can understand that. But the school can be designed differently as well as the chapel. And I think that they could work a little better with keeping Moscow, Idaho sensitive to the aesthetic of that beautiful mountains, the wildlife that we have and all that. So that's my concerns for this.
Thank you for your comments. Other comments?
I'm Brad Halter, 1301 Walenta Drive in Moscow, and I just have a quick question regarding the floodplain. I was wondering if anybody knows whether the 1996 flood was considered a 100-year flood. Thank you.
Do you have any information about that?
I believe it was, but I would have to research to know for certain. But
we have a floodplain expert right there.
No, here, go ahead and tell us right now. Come up.
Yeah, I'm Scott Becker with Hodge & Associates at 405 South Washington. The 96 flood, it varied in the area that you were at as to where the 100-year flood was. But through Moscow, that did not reach the 100-year mark. I believe it was And I guess just to step back a little bit, the 100-year flood doesn't necessarily refer to what happens every 100 years. It's the percent chance that a flood of that magnitude could happen in any year. So a 1% chance is the 100-year flood. So it was up there around the 85-year flood is what they would have classified that as. We did some floodplain analysis lately and have worked with FEMA to get these numbers. So yeah, that was a right around in the 85-year flood is what they would have considered that.
So close but no cigar?
Right.
Okay.
For the most part. Now, there was areas that did get impacted a little bit more, and they would be, I think they did consider that the 100-year flood in certain areas. But in Moscow it wasn't.
Thank you. Other comments opposed to this project?
Good evening. My name is Tony Driver. I live at 2322 Concord Street, adjacent to Mountain View Park, and I'm a neighbor to the proposed site. My formal name is Arthur Anthony, but the only people that call me Arthur is my mother. And so please refer to me as Tony. I would appreciate that. Madam Chairperson and board members, thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight in opposition to the application for the conditional use permit. My arguments are based in two broad categories. One is environmental, the other is economic. On the environmental side, I submit to you that my entire life's career has been devoted to soil erosion and sediment control. From the years 1990 until the year 1998, I served on the board of directors of the International Erosion Control Association. And through my officer's position and responsibilities to that international group, I worked very closely with Soil and Water Conservation, Bureau of Land Management, other agencies in creating the Certified Professional in Erosion and Sediment Control Certificate. I myself was one of the earliest holders of a CPESC certificate. Certificate was created to test and to vet applicants and their qualifications to participate in conjunction with people like our local design groups to prepare soil erosion and sediment control plans. I myself retired in the year 2000, and I no longer carry the certification because I don't want to go to the convention every year and do all of the continuing education requirements, and also it's rather expensive. And so I have let my certification elapse. I tell you that story in the hopes that I might impress upon you that you might think that I know what I'm talking about when I present this to you. On the environmental side of the argument, the area in question is a very, very low-lying wetland. I feel confident that if submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers that the western portion of this plot would be designated, if they were asked to survey, as a certified wetland. The qualifications for a wetland take into consideration much more than just standing water and the movement of water. It has to do with the entire ecosystem associated with the discharged area. In our case, we're talking about Paradise Creek. Some of us well remember that in 1982, the city of Moscow created Mountain View Park. Mountain View Park, prior to that, was a standing wetland and a marsh. Paradise Creek was the primary source of stormwater evacuation, and it harbored thousands upon thousands of different species and critters, from microbes to red-winged blackbirds, all composing what's referred to as a riparian condition. The Clean Water Act of 1981 established the rules that would be implemented over time, and the wetland provisions of that act were not implemented until 1983. We grandfathered in just before. But if you were here and living there like I was, you saw us bring dump truck after dump truck of fill we put approximately an average, I should say, of 6 feet of fill on top of the wetland in order to remove it. In the process of doing that, we then did knee-jerk reactions for almost 10 years of actually dredging Paradise Creek. And it wasn't until through the testimony of the folks at Palouse Clearwater Environmental Institute that we understood what a riparian condition is and what it entails. We've heard testimony tonight from the applicant with regards to stormwater management, to regards to the floodplain, etc., but all of those concerns have been directed to the site itself. The questions posed about floodplain, as an example, are directed to what are the impacts on the site with regards to floodplain. There have been no questions or comments with regards to the impact of environment or floodplain downstream from the site. If you look at this wonderful plan, which, by the way, compliments to the architects and to the designers for a beautiful plan. It is beautiful. It's just gorgeous. I just hate it that it's located on this particular site. The topog that you see before you, each one of those lines represent, I think, a 2-foot fall, if I'm correct from previous viewing at planning and zoning, which means that from east to west, the property falls toward Paradise Creek from approximately 7 feet in total. It's very low. If you also look on the design in front of you, you see on the edges, there's some little things on the edge called retention ponds. Retention ponds are a technique in soil and sediment control, soil erosion and sediment control to retain water. The natural process of a wetland is just exactly that. I'll give you a visual as quickly and as simply as I can. Water falls on the land. Water percolates through the soil until it's saturated. Our soil type is Palouse-Los, the most fertile land in the world for growing wonderful wheat. Unfortunately, in this case, under that Palouse-Los is a clay lens. The clay lens goes toward Paradise Creek, and so water that penetrates as far as it can then moves laterally across the top of the clay lens until it's eventually discharged into nature's drainage, which is Paradise Creek. Each square foot, each square inch that is removed from nature's sponge, such as buildings, parking lots, roofs, roads, all of the water that falls on each one of those things has to be collected and discharged as stormwater in some manner. Nature's way is to let it go as I described, and what doesn't go pools. It pools until it's, in quotes, retained until sunshine evaporates it, other factors working in conjunction eventually goes away. I'm surprised, and I have to offer this comment to the designers, that you've designed and planned your retention areas on the north side of your property when the southwestern side of the property is the one most impacted by storm water movement and pooling, which doesn't loosen up until about the first or second week in June. So each of those drops of water has to be collected. They have to be discharged. The only place to discharge them is Paradise Creek, because that's the drainage. So what happens downstream in terms of the riparian condition of Paradise Creek? Sediment occurs, sedimentation builds up, floodplain increases in scope and diameter. So, in conclusion of the arguments on environment, I urge you that, first, you should deny this application for conditional use. If you find in your hearts and in your evaluation that you will issue a conditional use permit, I beg you to attach to it a condition of a determination of wetland, and also attach to it a determination of environmental impact all the way through into the western boundary of our fair city. Now to the economic argument. The economic argument has to do with property tax, and you've heard this argument before, I'm sure. I have every confidence in our city's ordinances and in our city's laws and regulations with regards to subdivision, roads and various things of that nature, that infrastructure addressing stormwater discharge and also addressing potable water and sewage discharge are very adequate. We've done a good job in our city to create those laws, and they're good ones. And there's nothing wrong in this particular site, in my view. My argument is off-site because the Logos School has sought and continues to seek protection each year under Idaho Code 63602 sub B, relief from property taxes that's afforded to churches, educational institutions, and so on. So property tax that would normally be associated with an R2 subdivision, as an example, are forfeit to the city through the process of collecting property taxes to the county. And as you know, if you've worked with the city government, the majority of our general fund comes from the fair share of property taxes from Lake Tahoe County. Even though the infrastructure may be met on property, off property, considering the location of this property, is that it requires an increased head, which is pressure from either a tank or from pumps to create water pressure to serve this facility. Living adjacent to it, at the very end of Concord Street, I can tell you personally that during heavy use times, especially in summer months, the water pressure decreases significantly in that neighborhood. And if the water mains there are going to be simply attached and without further development on the head side, then we will not have significant pressure. That burden falls upon the general fund of our fair city. The second part of that, that's potable water. The second part of that is sewer discharge. Regarding its lowest location and the proposed area of the bridge, which is probably, I'm thinking, one of the lowest areas in the corner of that property. If there's sewer being discharged there, it has to cross Paradise Creek. If sewer is being discharged on the north side, it still has to cross Paradise Creek, and God forbid we cross Paradise Creek on top. And so that means that effluent must be pumped. We're talking about lift stations. We're talking about pumping stations to get effluent off property. Once it's off property, it's the responsibility of our city again. And there, I think that additional muscle to move the effluent would be required at the city's expense, and I think that's unfair. Finally, I'm coming to a conclusion here. As said earlier, a 100-year floodplain, by definition, is a flood event that has a 1% probability of occurring in any given year. The 100-year flood is also sometimes referred to as a 1% flood. But you might wonder, why do we keep such records? Well, the reason is that it provides a basis for flood insurance rates. And on average nationwide, 100-year flood estimates are sufficient for the purposes of the National Flood Insurance Program, and they offer reasonable estimates for future flood risk. However, a floodplain designation is reactive, not proactive. The U.S. Geological Survey and others, now FEMA, I understand, is involved in creating the data. I have no idea, since I retired, how often the data is collected. But data is periodically collected, and the floodplain is adjusted according to the data. I propose to you that the floodplain of Paradise Creek will increase as a result of building such a facility on this site. And as it increases, those who lend for mortgages, those who live already along Ford Street, adjacent to Paradise Creek, who pay flood insurance, people across the street, as an example, from which would be the west side of Ford Street, may very well be required as a condition of their financing to provide flood insurance. Finally, in the year 2005, the Moscow School District proposed a bond levy election to our citizens and brought before the voters in April of 2005 this levy to fund a proposal for a new high school campus on the northeast edge of the city, the exact property location we are now discussing. I'll say it again. It is the exact property location that we are now discussing. The levy needed 2/3 majority to pass, but it was soundly defeated with only 44% of the citizens of our city in favor. Now, near 60% of the citizens of Moscow voted against that levy, not because they're opposed to education. As you know, we have one of the better education systems around, and this is like the best in the state of Idaho. People come to Moscow, Idaho, to raise their children here because of the educational opportunities afforded by our school district, and also people come here for the educational opportunities afforded to them by Logos School, which in its particular category of education is rated very high. So the question is not about education. The question is not about Gothic. The question is not about height, which I might compliment you on your design. I think it's wonderful. I think it's beautiful to see the Gothic buildings like that. The question is that it was a bad plan then. It's a bad plan now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Other comments against this project? Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Well, the hour is late, and a number of questions have been raised by Mr. Driver's comments in particular. Becky, in terms of answering some of those questions, are you in a position to do that tonight or not?
You're talking about his questions?
Yes.
I am not in a position to respond to those questions.
Okay.
No.
Would it be, in terms of conducting this meeting, if we held off, if we closed the hearing and reopened the hearing at our next meeting, would we be able to have staff here who could address those
I
questions?
think that we could certainly do that.
Madam Chair, what particular questions are you concerned about?
Question from, yes, go ahead.
What are the concerns that you have that you think
Oh,
we need?
the concerns of the question about the ability of the city to impose a request for an environmental impact statement, as Mr. Driver suggested, for the water and wetlands impact of this development, the economic impact that he has raised, those kinds of questions.
Well, we
In
can't
general,
impose an environmental impact
Let me finish.
study.
I beg your pardon?
We don't have any authority to impose an environmental impact study.
Well, it's very interesting. We might.
Okay.
We might have that authority. Whether we have it, under under NEPA, I doubt, but we might have that ability otherwise. Mr. Becker, you had your hand up for a moment.
Is there an opportunity for rebuttal? If I can answer almost all?
I haven't. Well, you could certainly try, but I think that it might be preferable to refer this to a later meeting so that we could address that with staff here as well. Now, the other questions that were brought up had to do with economic impacts as well, and flood insurance, property taxes, and similar things. We can go ahead and do the rebuttal right now, but I believe if we do the rebuttal, then we have to close the hearing. Is that correct?
I do not know. I would have to look up public meeting law to confirm that. I don't know if Jerry knows.
Okay, well then, we'll at least take rebuttal, and then we'll consider where we go from there. Mr. Becker, anyone who wishes to rebut, and Mr. Becker's first.
Yeah, Scott Becker, Hodge & Associates, 405 South Washington. I'd just like to go down the list as they were presented, and I think I can answer almost all of your questions through that. F Street being congested as a possible drop-off site. I've discussed that with staff because that was brought up at other meetings, and talking to the engineering department, they said they would keep an eye on the uses of F Street, and if it became an issue, they would address it at that time. Right now, Mountain View is intended to be an arterial street with minimum stop sign, stop opportunities or four-way stops. So they are really at this point dead set against stoppage at F Street. So that is one that staff is going to keep an eye on and address. They've also applied for a Tiger grant to improve Mountain View. I know it's been in the paper, but that would improve it all the way from 8th Street through to where our project is also. The dog park, we understand the dog park is there, and the school is fine with that. There's a fence right now that goes along Mountain View Park on the east side that kind of contains the dogs, and we'd prefer to see that still left in place just for protection of the students. Ultimately, student protection is the most important thing to the school and we believe to the community. I agree with Tony about the impact of additional impervious surface, and that just lends to another argument as to why we should minimize the footprint of the school and go a little bit higher. Instead of going one level with the school, if we can do 2 levels, then we minimize that footprint and we minimize the runoff. And the reason that we have retention ponds on the plan versus detention ponds, detention pond is designed to release the water at the same rate that it does prior to construction, so that we do not increase the floodplain, that it does not have an impact on the floodplain. However, in this instance, with the exception of the track and field, the rest of the open space is intended to be, very heavily, utilized for plants and green space. And we would like to water that with, we would like to capture the water that runs off and reuse that, so that it doesn't actually even get into Paradise Creek. That we contain it and that we reuse it to water the landscape and beautify that way. Another thing is, right now, this is a farm field. It gets tilled up every year. Every spring, you have runoff that comes right down through the middle of the site. You can see it on the right-hand side of the school. That's a drainage. All that water runs off. It carries sediment with it and runs right into Paradise Creek. If we can stabilize the whole site, then we're going to minimize any sediment transport in that area. And so once again, that just kind of lends itself to how I think we've kind of planned to make this site work and minimize those impacts and actually improve Paradise Creek rather than detract from it. We have done a wetland study, and there are some areas of wetland within the site. Those areas will be mitigated. We have additional site that we can do mitigation. We're working with a professional to work on that.
Is there anything more that you would like to tell us?
Yeah?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll get to you in a minute.
Okay. As we get into the tax implications, granted they are granted that tax-free status, but every homeowner that sends their kids to this school is paying for the other school, but also paying for this school. So they're still paying taxes. It draws more people into the community, and it increases that tax base. So I don't believe that the city takes a negative hit because of that. All the infrastructure that you see here tonight, that's all put in by this development and not at the city's expense. We tie into city utilities, but it's not at the city's expense. The water line, we anticipate that improving water throughout that area because we're going to loop the system. So versus having less water pressure, we're going to be able to increase the water pressure by running a larger line up the arterial and through that area. So those were the points I really wanted to touch on to address your concerns.
Okay, and one further thing that you didn't quite directly address, the question of the development of Mountain View and the toward the site and the bike paths and sidewalks and the rest of that. What responsibility is this developer going to have for that?
They're going to have the responsibility to widen Mountain View. We're also working with the Public Works Department to whether we put in a bike path or a sidewalk, probably a bike path at this time on the north side of Mountain View. It wouldn't be on both sides, but it would be on one side. So we are.
What about sidewalks?
Well, it would be the path or a sidewalk. That's the discussion. What is best for future plans of Mountain View? I know, at some point, is 28 feet the width they're really targeting? Are they going to just put it in and rip it out? We want to kind of plan ahead and work with Public Works to get that correct.
Okay, Mr. Long, you had a question.
You referred to wetland studies you've done. So have you determined whether there are any jurisdictional wetlands on the property? Or you're speaking wetlands like in a just generic sense?
No, there's specific wetlands sites on there. They're emergent wetlands.
Right, but there are none that would be characterized as jurisdictional wetlands
No.
subject to federal. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Any other rebuttal testimony? Thank you, Mr.
Actually, I
Becker.
do have one additional question, if that's okay,
Oh.
please. And I don't know if you're necessarily the person to answer this, or we can ask Becky. But so, as part of your development, you will build this new road, and it will end at your property boundary.
Correct.
And then any subsequent continuation of the minor arterial down to D would be the responsibility of the neighboring property owner whenever that's developed.
That's correct.
So at the end of your project, effectively the public right-of-way will end at your...
Right. We can't dedicate somebody else's property.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further rebuttal testimony? Now, is there any desire on the part of the board to keep the hearing open until the next session, or would you care to? What is your pleasure?
Well, I think we've heard good testimony on both sides, and I don't know that any additional testimony will help us clarify the issues. It would be my preference to close the public hearing and then do the delayed hour, make a motion to table any board discussion and vote.
Okay, now you know that if we close the public hearing, then if we wish to have staff here, then, and the other people who are interested, who are here tonight, come at that time, they won't be able to question the staff or have any further discussion of the merits of this project with us.
I believe that we can still question staff, though.
We certainly can, but the citizens will not be able to.
Correct.
So you understand that?
I do.
Right. And other comments, or did I see any?
Madam Chairman, I think that given the length of time that we've been here, I personally would prefer to see this through at this point. The folks are here. As a clarification, if we did close the public hearing, it could be reopened at a later date, subject to the notice provisions of the statute, or the ordinance. So we'd have to notice it.
But that's quite an expensive process.
I recognize that.
The reason I'm suggesting that if we intend to deal with this later and have additional staff testimony, we might, in fairness, wish simply to adjourn the hearing to a time certain and then take it up at that point.
Madam Chairman, I don't think that, I did not find anything that requires additional information from staff personally. So,
Any other comments? Okay, I don't hear any real concern to keep the hearing open, so I will declare the hearing closed, and I will invite the board to make a motion as to where you wish to go. If someone wishes to move for acceptance or rejection of the applications in front of us, or if you wish to table that conversation to time certain in the near future, I'll take whatever motion you wish to propose.
I'm ready to be, I agree with Marshall at this point. I think due to the lateness of the hour, I don't know how long we're going to be here.
Is that
discussing.
a motion to
That's
table?
a motion to table it and to
Okay, it's
move it to a-
non-debatable. So
move it to a
is
different-
there a second?
a motion to adjourn. You
Okay.
table motions. You'd have to adjourn the meeting and continue it, I believe. There's nothing to table.
The conversation on what we do with this motion,
We don't have a motion.
or what we do with this application.
Table the application.
That's the issue, tabling the applications, consideration of it to a time hopefully certain that we could designate tonight. Is that exactly your motion?
That is what I'm getting at, to talk
Okay.
about this.
Is there a second?
No, I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that this matter be tabled for final consideration of the application in front of us to a time certain in the near future. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
Okay, 1 no, 4 yes. So the motion passes. When could we 5 meet again?
August.
Would we like to decide that via email, as we always do, and notice the
Well, I
meeting
think that if
accordingly?
we always know our schedules, we might be able to do it tonight, when these folks are now.
Email and
Okay.
So I hear a lot of
It would not be
moving
me
motion.
in attendance at a future meeting, so I would need to work with staff to schedule that, so.
Okay, well, I'm worried about the folks who might want to come and watch the proceedings
Certainly.
and listen to what's going on. So if you
We have to
all-
satisfy the notice requirements at this point.
I wasn't finished with what I was
Okay.
mentioning. And what I would hope you would do is watch the newspaper, and you will find out when we're meeting, just as we will eventually find out.
I would be happy to take down email addresses from anyone who would like us to notify you of a future meeting time.
Now, if there's nothing further on the agenda tonight, I'd certainly welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.